Chapter 553. Zhou gently rubbed the bright red flowers with her fingertips and left in the military vehicle with a smile, leaving the young couple strolling in the Linyuan in the rain. The black and white cliff at the end of the lawn in front of them was like an ink painting, which was particularly hazy in the spring rain. The drizzle made this ordinary spring day a touch of moisture, as if countless small water droplets had accumulated into powder, which instantly dispersed when they hit the face, making it very refreshing. Nan Xiangmei was wearing a very well-tailored blue windbreaker, and the belt around her waist was completely plain without any jewelry embellishments. It must be the masterpiece of a handmade clothing shop in Gangdu. It was not luxurious or dazzling, but was just as beautiful and quiet as her person, and also like the gentle rain between heaven and earth. Not knowing what to say, the girl slightly lowered her head and obediently followed Su Li's footsteps along the beautiful Linyuan scenery. Her two small fists were clenched tightly beside her, and the rain splashed on her slightly hot cheeks, but it couldn't make them feel cooler. Nan Xiangmei suddenly stopped and gathered her courage to look at Su Li's side face, and nervously asked, Did you receive my letter?" "Yes," Su Li stopped, nodded and replied, "I should have received all the letters." Nan Xiangmei smiled gently, but then a trace of uneasiness appeared in her bright eyes and asked, "Then, why didn't you reply?" Su Li knew how to answer. For him, Nan Xiangmei taking the initiative to express her love in the Wood Valley manner last time was really the biggest surprise and the pinnacle of vanity in his life. Even, sometimes when he recalled Nan Xiangmei's shy expression at that time, he felt that this kind of satisfaction was more than the success of the MX development. However, surprise and vanity pointed to a sense of absurdity. Until today, Su Li still didn't realize how outstanding he was. He didn't cultivate the correct and arrogant psychological foundation of Du Shaoqing. He couldn't understand how an ordinary guy like him, who was interesting when he was young, but now he was getting more and more boring. What qualifications did he have to receive the admiration of this young lady? Therefore, he was somewhat at a loss about the feelings hidden in Nan Xiangmei's letter, and he didn't know how to respond. Probably as Zhou said, he was used to associating feelings with marriage and family, so he had been unknowingly avoiding it. Shang Qiu was his ideal work partner and charming figure, and Jian Shuer was his adolescent idol or dream lover, so he could still try to get close to her, but when he met a beautiful girl who was not really familiar with him, he would escape very quickly. Not getting an answer from him, Nan Xiangmei lowered her head again in disappointment. Droplets of sparkling and translucent black hair rested peacefully on her jade-like cheek. At the end of the lawn, there was a pond gently swaying with countless small circles in the drizzle. The two people stood by the pond, silently watching. "I just came back from S2. I wrote in the letter that I am now doing volunteer work in the Foundation." "That's good," Su Li replied somewhat clumsily. "What a pity." Nan Xiangmei lowered her head and looked at the broken grass on the tip of her lambskin boots and said softly, "I have watched every episode of that documentary many times, but I have never found a positive image of you. What a pity." She sighed softly, quietly like raindrops falling into the pond. She cutely tilted her head, bravely looked at Su Li again, and said, "I was supposed to go to S1 on the day of the award ceremony, but I didn't expect to encounter a ray storm, which delayed my time. Otherwise, maybe I would have run to the George Carlin Center and crazily shouted like those fanatical admirers of yours." Listening to the words that gradually revealed her true feelings, Su Li's big heart beat faster. His voice was slightly hoarse as he changed the topic. He scratched his wet hair and said, "Did you come back on Li Laoqi's ship?" "Li Laoqi?" Nan Xiangmei silently repeated in her heart. She felt that this man's tone was really interesting. Li Xiaotong, this gloomy man, in his mouth, was like a street vendor selling bread. What a cute man! Thinking about this, she couldn't help but embarrassedly cover her cheeks, trying to block the heat there. Love makes people blind. In the eyes of a girl who has fallen in love, Even if the man's joke is boring, it is still the most humorous. No matter how ordinary the man's action is, they can find some deep meaning or hint or factor that makes them more fond of him. Su Lu stubbornly maintained the image of a gentleman, and maintained the posture of looking straight ahead. But from the corner of his eyes, he saw Nan Xiangmei shyly lowering her head. Under the gentle wind and drizzle, her beautiful cheeks were like a lotus flower. His heart moved again, and subconsciously he wanted to take out a silk handkerchief from the military bag to wipe the water droplets on her face. But his brain quickly woke up and stopped the movement of his hand in time, because that silk handkerchief was Jian Shui's. The rain seems to be getting heavier. Su Lu wiped the rain on his face, looked at the girl beside him and said with concern, "Let's go back. I'll go home soon." Nan Xiangmei's voice was a little disappointed. She said softly, "We don't need this kind of arranged coincidence in the future. Are you willing to eat with me and chat with me?" Su Lu continued to scratch his worried, wet hair. After a long time, he said, "Of course, let's exchange numbers." Nan Xiangmei raised her head in surprise. The crystal-clear pearl-like raindrops on her beautiful cheeks were full of joy. She quickly told him her phone number, and then lowered her head and said shyly, "I have your phone number. I asked for it from Li Laoqi." Mimicking Su Li's tone of voice, Nan Xiangmei felt even more embarrassed. She buried her head and murmured, "Maybe you will think that I'm a little out of line, but I'm not like this usually. I don't know why, but every time I talk to you, I'm very nervous." Su Lu wanted to tell her that it was because every time they met, she expressed some kind of emotion with an unimaginable courage. She didn't care how many times they met. However, he couldn't say these words. He just stood in front of her, blocking the rain that was blown by the wind. He said in a dry voice, "Actually, I'm more nervous than you." Far away left sky star region 435. 22. Near coordinate 89, there was a large area of stars that looked like Aquarius. In this place, which was called the Aquarius Galaxy by the people of the Empire, there was a giant planet. No human could survive on this giant planet because of its gravity. However, on the dark side of this giant planet, there was a satellite that would always accompany it. For thousands of years, countless silent warships used the shadow of the giant planet as cover to quietly enter and leave. Because this was the most important and most secret first-class base in the periphery of the Empire. In a corner of the base, two thin and small Empire mechanical soldiers were operating a robot to move equipment into a small warship. One of the mechanical soldiers spoke in his heavily accented language to his quiet companion beside him. "The other teams are preparing for the maneuver, but we have to move these hundreds of tons of equipment in before the warship takes off. Mechanical soldiers will always be mechanical soldiers. Huai Chaoshi, even if you are lucky and have the greatest surname in the Empire, you still can't change your fate," this mechanical soldier said indignantly. "Join the expeditionary army? That's possible. Under the premise that the main force is wiped out, we can go to the battlefield to gain some military merits and hope to get rid of the identity of a commoner and become a small noble. But the problem is, for so many years, the expeditionary army rarely comes back. Who dares to take this risk?" He suddenly lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "Right, have you heard? Recently, there has been a rumor in the military camp that those bastards of the Federation have started their counterattack. Our expeditionary army has suffered heavy casualties, and even old General Umburi died over there." Huai Chaoshi listened silently and didn't give any emotional or verbal response. Under the direct arrangement of the Empire's military headquarters, he quietly came to the front line and became the most common mechanical soldier. However, it didn't mean that he had enough patience and tolerance to discuss the important matters of the Empire with these lower-class people. When he heard the three words Umburi, for the first time, his face showed emotion and his eyes narrowed slightly. 3 hours later, A maneuver personally led by the Empire's County King Kadon started from this most secretive military base without any observers or media report. Regarding this maneuver, the members of the Royal Intelligence Agency hidden in the military excitedly and coldly sent one report after another to their superiors, but they didn't get any response. Those confused and angry military observers were directly put under house arrest by the fleet until they knew the truth. Dozens of Night Wolf-class light warships slowly rose into the sky and followed the monster-class Black Mothership that was 17 kilometers long into space. Under the shadow of the giant planet, the fleet of warships that covered the sky looked so shocking. The fleet left the thin atmosphere and used the gravitational difference between the distant star and the nearby giant planet to slowly change direction like ghosts and head into the dark depths of the universe. However, out of all the soldiers' expectations, that monster-class Black Mothership left the fleet after 17 standard hours and stopped at the entrance of Bipping Corridor. Like a giant father, it quietly and kindly watched the entire fleet leave. From the generals to the soldiers of the Empire's fleet, they all smelled something different. Their fleet was temporarily formed on the surface, but in reality, they had received almost 2 years of special training. The fleet was all light warships, and they had all received major modifications in the base. Other than the necessary concealment equipment for high-speed cross-tunnel navigation, the warships had all the protective equipment removed. They tried their best to leave the energy output and position to those extremely sharp weapon systems, the extreme modification of the warships. All external communications were forcibly blocked before departure, and the fleet was in a silent state of the night. There was no way to contact the base or the military headquarters. Maybe even the military headquarters didn't know where this inconspicuous medium-sized fleet disappeared to. All kinds of facts and speculations made the relaxed and casual expression on the soldiers' faces replaced by caution and doubt. They vaguely guessed that this was definitely not a normal drill. Could it be that the hot-tempered and murderous County King Kadon was really like what the rumors said, and he had some outrageous thoughts in his mind? But what could these light warships do? The answer to all these questions was answered 3 days later. County King Kadon, who everyone thought was left on the giant mothership, unexpectedly appeared in the internal communication system of the fleet. This is the most important military operation since the founding of the Empire. On the light screen, the general of the Empire coldly said to everyone in this secret mission, "We will be recorded in the history books." This chapter is well named. Chapter 554. All the soldiers of this medium-sized fleet that was moving like ghosts at the border of the Empire heard a piece of shocking news. The fleet was going to break through the space channel that connected the Empire and the Federation and enter the hinterland of the Federation to carry out a sacred plan. For decades, the war between the Empire and the Federation had never stopped. The Federation had attacked the Empire twice, but because of the one-way door in the universe, the Empire couldn't attack the Federation directly. Instead, they had to go around the barren star region and spend more than 6 years of interstellar travel before they could attack the West Woods region of the Federation. Regardless of their social class, whether they were the insulters or the ones being insulted, the people of the Empire were all depressed and pained by this tragic situation of being beaten up passively. They constantly hoped that the scientists on planet Tianjing would be able to quickly grasp the rules of these 2 giant spatial channels and send the Empire's brave warriors and invincible royal mecha operators directly into the Federation, so that those shameless invaders of the Federation could deeply feel the pain of their homeland being threatened by the flames of war. However, after a long time had passed, the Imperium could only send the young warriors on the long journey of no return. The national machinery was fully overloaded and could barely meet the resource requirements of the expedition. The invisible giant door in the universe did not show any signs of loosening. It directly attacked the territory of the Federation. For the fanatical citizens of the Imperium, it was like a beautiful but unrealistic dream. All the officers and soldiers in the fleet were dumbfounded at the blushing face of General Keaton on the light curtain. Hearing his words, they realized that this dream was in their hands and was about to become a reality. Probably because they couldn't believe it, the fleet made up of dozens of light battleships fell silent at this moment. Finally, someone woke up and shouted in ecstasy. This was followed by countless heated discussions and tossed military hats in the relatively narrow space of the battleship. The soldiers of the Empire knew that this mysterious mission, this history-making mission, would definitely be extremely dangerous. It might even be a dead end. Furthermore, their battleships were still in the process of slowly accelerating and were still very far away from the Federation. However, they were so excited that it was as if they had already won a great battle. The black hibiscus flag was flying above the Federation territory. Now that spring has come, can summer be far behind? If the fleet could really successfully pass through the space channel and enter the heart of the Federation, would it be long before the millions of soldiers of the Empire charged into the Federation? How do you spell this word? The skinny soldier moved closer to Huai Chaosher and asked in a trembling voice. His fingers that were holding the pen were also trembling slightly. Perhaps it was because he was too excited to know about this mission, or perhaps it was because he was afraid of being asked by his superiors to write a will. The Imperial Army generously provided 2 sheets of plant fiber paper to all the soldiers who participated in the plan and asked them to write their wills. This detail proved that the Imperial military leadership had a clear understanding of the complexity and danger of this plan. Although this plan was named by the Imperial Military Minister as the Interdimensional Hunt, anyone would have thought that the giant space opening technology that had just been developed for less than 2 years could bury this fleet in the space channel at any time. Even if this fleet could pass through the space channel and enter the heart of the Federation, the fleet would immediately face the glory of the Charter, the powerful space fleet of the Federation, and they still had to complete that secret mission. This ghost-like fleet only had a few dozen light battleships, and they had to carry out such an important mission. Would they still be able to come back alive? The smell of engine oil in the maintenance room was very strong, and the stench of vomit came from the corner. The metal structure of the battleship made a buzzing sound due to the high-speed travel. The environment was very bad, but Huai Chaosher's face was expressionless. He took the paper that the middle-aged soldier handed over and casually wrote a word. In the process of writing, he inadvertently glanced at the soldier and found out that the most important content in the soldier's will was the ownership of the homesteading machine in his hometown. It seemed that this person was more inclined to leave the most important production material in his family to the son of his ex-wife. The middle-aged soldier smiled honestly, took the paper, and continued to write seriously on the table. From time to time, he would ask the people around him about the legal issue of inheritance rights. The soldier's explanation, in Huai Chaosher's eyes, was full of mistakes, and could even be said to be nonsense. Then he looked at the soldier's worried expression. It seemed that even so, he still found it hard to understand. Some people had already finished writing their wills, and were leaning against the cushioned chairs and chatting loudly. They smoked low-quality tobacco, their mouths full of black and yellow teeth spitting out vulgarities and excited discussions from time to time. It seemed that no one was worried about their lives in this secret mission. Huai Chaosher did not understand how a semi-literate civilian could be qualified for the precise maintenance work. Could it be that the basic education of the Empire had declined to such an extent? Looking at the boring faces of his companions in the maintenance room, he could not understand what the future of the Empire had to do with these cannon fodder-like characters. Why were they so excited? After a long silence, he suddenly opened his mouth and asked the middle-aged soldier beside him, "This mission is very dangerous. Your 3 sons are still very young, but I see that you don't seem to be afraid. Why is that?" The middle-aged soldier took out his cigarette case and handed a cigarette to him. After being rejected, he lit one with an unnatural expression. After taking a deep breath, He answered honestly with a smile, "Of course I'm afraid. But a war has to be fought. Otherwise, if those bastards from the Federation attack my hometown, what will happen to my broken family? Besides, even if I am conscripted into the Expeditionary Army, it won't be easier than this mission. I told you last time I heard that the battle over there was very bad. More importantly," the middle-aged soldier waved his cigarette happily and said, "we are the first batch of fully organized troops to pass through the space passage. Just like what the commander said, my name will be in the history textbooks in the future. Tell me, how proud of my broken family and my sons." Huai Chaosher looked at the man with a blank expression. In his heart, he thought that the future history of the Empire would definitely record the name of the Emperor who initiated this plan, the commander who led the fleet to carry out the plan, and the names of the big shots in the military, but definitely not an ordinary soldier like him. He did not say anything. He looked at the middle-aged soldier and smiled slightly. He reached out and patted the soldier's shoulder. Then, he walked towards the quiet environment outside the maintenance room. The action of patting the shoulder was a little stiff. It was very much like the praise or comfort of a superior to a subordinate. However, to him, it was an extremely rare expression of emotion. The middle-aged soldier looked at the back of the skinny guy and felt a little strange. He could not help but scratch his head with an ink pen. Would history record his name? Would it be Huai Caosher's real name or Su Meng's title? According to the plan drawn up by the Emperor to the military, if everything went smoothly, he would only be an observer and bystander in this operation. It seemed that it would be better if his name was not remembered. Huai Chaosher, who was wearing a sergeant's military uniform, held a glass of water and stood at the corner of the third floor of the battleship. He looked at the busy and excited soldiers in the middle of the field and thought about these questions silently. His current identity was the lowest level of maintenance soldier. He was not qualified to enter the hall at all. He could only be a bystander, which was somewhat similar to the role he played. At this moment, the entire fleet of the Imperium was brimming with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Countless wills were gathered together, but there was no sadness or fear, only the fierce and resolute collective will. Everybody was busy at their posts. Even the few officials of the Royal Intelligence Agency and the instructors of the Royal Training Corps, who were famous for their fanatical brainwashing skills, were smiling quietly, which was rare for them. This ghost fleet, which was responsible for carrying out the hunting mission, was all made up of light warships of the same model. There was no difference between the warship. There was no special electric control ship or supply ship. The biggest similarity was that the warship's cruising speed was extremely fast. From the light drifting light outside the porthole, the working status of the engines could be clearly seen. At this time, the fleet had not entered the second level of acceleration. The extremely fine cosmic particles had begun to cause the residual high-temperature fuel at the edge of the engines to recede linearly. Huai Chaosher had just moved her eyes away from the porthole when she suddenly realized that the hall had become quiet. Then, there was a series of enthusiastic and disciplined applause. A fierce-looking middle-aged general, whose every pore exuded a sense of pride and cruelty, walked to the center of the Imperial soldiers under the protection of his subordinates. He was the highest commander of this hunting mission, the butcher general who was famous for his bloody suppression of riots all over the Empire, Countess Kerton. Beside him was a beautiful blonde civil official with a hot body. Then, there were the staff officers who were preparing to record the orders. There were also a few officers wearing black jumpsuits with a stern expression. Someone recognized the identity of one of the officers in black. The soldiers instantly guessed that these people must be the ace pilots from the Royal Special Mecha Unit. In the Imperial Army, to be called an ace pilot, one must have at least a level 4 piloting skill, and the ace pilots of the Royal Mecha Unit were even more likely to reach level 5. On a normal day, normal soldiers would never have the chance to meet these legendary figures. But today they saw a few of them at once. The crowd couldn't help but start to excitedly whisper and guess. The mystery was about to be revealed. The metal wall on the left side of the hall on the third floor of the battleship slowly opened up, like the curtain of a drama being lifted. 6 mechas that were fixed in the warehouse by heavy springs, flashed with a dazzling metallic light, proudly and coldly appeared in front of the Imperial soldiers. Not long after the Expeditionary Army suffered a devastating blow from the Federation's new MX mecha, the Empire finally developed a new generation of mecha that belonged to them. It was given a tacky name, the new mecha. It didn't use the dual-engine technology of the Federation's new mecha, because after the research department of the military couldn't solve the electron turbulence problem that their counterparts in the Federation had encountered before, they quickly shifted their research to the direction of miniaturized engine wiring. The Empire's new Wolf Fang mecha had a total of 67 spherical joints in the heavy metal body, and all of them were installed with superimposed micro-engines made of super alloy. Once the full power output was output, its speed would reach a terrifying number. Chapter 555. The newest model of the Empire's Wolf Fang mech appeared in front of everyone. The ridiculously long mechanical leg design made the body of this mech appear tall, thin, and cold. The most shocking thing was that all the spherical joints on the body of the mech were hidden under the alloy plate. Regardless of the size and purpose, all of them were installed with a miniature output superimposed engine. This was the most advanced power equipment in the Empire. It was like countless bone spikes sticking out of the metal plates, but also like sharp fangs. It lacked a simple aesthetic, but it had a bloodthirsty charm. The soldiers of the Empire looked at the new mech in shock. It took them a long time to get rid of the excitement. The advanced mechanics specially selected by the logistics department started to work under the mech, doing the final maintenance before the test. The 6 ace mecha operators from the Royal Mecha Battalion bowed to King Carden and didn't show any other expression. They walked to their mechas coldly and cooperated with the mechanics to calibrate the data. They were preparing for the special training that would come later. Like ice being thawed, the stiff bodies of the Imperial soldiers in the hall began to move again. They continued their work in silence and seriousness. Only the smiles on their faces and the quick and accurate movements of their orders showed how excited they were at the moment. The Empire not only found the key to open the gate of the universe, but also had a new mech that was comparable to the Federation's MX mech. How could the soldiers of the Empire not be excited? An hour later, at the warship luncheon, in order to boost the morale of the troops, Duke Carleton once again appeared in front of his subordinates with that beautiful female civil official in tow. The officers gathered around the Dark Wolf Fang mecha and pointed at it excitedly, praising the Emperor's foresight and greatness, the RAS's great achievement after years of patience, and the amazing operation of those ace mechas. There were even more people who spoke of the amazing princess in a fanatical and admiring tone. Huai Chaosher stood in a dark corner outside the door. Beside her were her excited mechanic colleagues who couldn't get close to the mech. Mechanic and mechanic only differed by one word, but their status was very different. No one noticed this inconspicuous, thin, and short soldier. No one noticed that his expression was too cold and calm, which made him stand out from the crowd. Huai Chaosher looked at the gloomy mecha in the distance, unperturbed. From the research and development of the Empire's newest generation of revolutionary mecha, he had made extremely important contributions in every step of the process. He could not find any way to be humble about this. The design team of the RAS had been in close contact with him all this time. They listened to his cold and direct opinions, and he was the one who personally controlled the first experimental machine to obtain data. He could recite all the data of the Wolf Fang mech by heart. The engine, the hybrid system, the power output norm, the standard weight of 2,237 tons, and in line with the design intent and the use of new materials, this new model of mech was the lightest mech in the history of the Empire. It was 66 meters tall and wide. These complex or simple data units naturally appeared in his mind, but they made him frown. Over the past few decades, many people had discovered a strange fact. The units of measurement used by the Empire and the Federation were extremely similar. No one could explain why two independently developed civilizations would walk the same path in the end. It was easier to understand the weight unit because the closest substance to humanoid life was water. That was why they usually used water as the standard for weight. But what about the length unit? A length of 1 meter was equal to the transition between 2p10 and 5d1 of a krypton-86 atom. It was 1650763. 73 times the wavelength of the radiation in a vacuum. This was inexplicable, and he could not find any basis for the concept of length in reality at all. Why Chaucer lowered his eyes slightly as a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips. He was unwilling to think deeper about this problem. The scholars of the Empire who dared to express interest or comment on this situation had long been thrown into prison or secretly assassinated. But her identity and status were enough to support her to make any ridiculous reasoning. He just didn't want to think about it. No matter what happened billions of years ago, he wanted to see the present and billions of years later. The history of the universe might be a sad comedy, but those sour emotions should be left for the young and middle-aged people who loved literature to be intoxicated. Sitting on the high command platform, County King Codone was in a very high mood. He was looking forward to the upcoming assassination mission that was destined to amaze the universe. He didn't care about the presence of hundreds of subordinates. His broad hand with extremely long hair naturally reached into the skirt of the female secretary next to him and forcefully rubbed her two plump buttocks. The female secretary's face slightly reddened, but she didn't dare to dodge. The surrounding officers acted like they didn't see this scene. They continued to eat their food and drink their wine. The officers closer to them didn't even dare to raise their heads. The imperial armies had strict discipline, but for the high and mighty royal family, the so-called discipline was the requirement they had for their people. They must not hinder their own enjoyment of life. Looking at this scene from afar, Chaucer slightly frowned and showed a trace of disgust. He already knew the style of this butcher general. It seemed that when he suppressed the riots in the past decade, this style was not a problem. However, this fleet was about to carry out such an important mission. As the commander, this person didn't know how to restrain himself at all? The thin and short soldier frowned. No one would think that he was mocking the high and mighty County King Codone in his mind. However, County King Codone, who was laughing with an unpleasant voice in the distance, seemed to have sensed something. He looked over with a surprised expression and then saw the figure in the shadow outside the door. County King Codone's laughter suddenly stopped. He awkwardly turned his head, and that big hand had already retracted from the female secretary's skirt. Chaucer turned around and left expressionlessly. He returned to his single cabin. He sat on the bed and put on a strange posture. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged. His hands were on his knees, and his hollow fingers were pointing up like he was hugging a ball. They were slightly trembling in the windless space. In the corner of the warship storage room, there was a special wolf fang mech that was still covered with an anti-static cloth. There was a layer of dust on the cloth, and no one came to ask. The information system entered the dark night and couldn't contact anyone. The appearance of the new wolf fang mech, the appearance of the best mech warrior of the Empire, and the excitement and nervousness before the battle. The same scene played out in all the warships. A medium-sized fleet made up of all light warships couldn't give the Federation enough damage. Even if the interdimensional hunting plan succeeded, it could only make the Federation fall into temporary chaos. It couldn't change the balance of power between the two forces in the universe and the status quo of the war. However, the Imperial Expeditionary Force was completely wiped out. This news couldn't be hidden for long. At this moment, the Empire needed a shocking and symbolic victory. Even if this victory was obtained through a shameless sneak attack, it could only vent the anger in the heart and didn't have many practical benefits. Therefore, the Emperor of the Empire personally approved this hunting plan. For the sake of this plan, the Empire had sent out more than 100 powerful mecha warriors from the Royal Mecha Battalion. They had also sent over all the new mecha that had just been successfully developed. In addition to the method of passing through the space channel, as well as a certain preparation method after the fleet had entered the Federation, the Empire had actually used the 3 secret and important research results that they had spent decades and countless resources and energy on this assassination plan. This wasn't a drill, and it was far beyond the scope of an experiment. This represented the Empire's chilling attitude. This was a bloody revenge, and it must succeed. After the ghostly fleet roamed the edge of space for 13 days, the voice that the soldiers had been waiting for finally came from the communication system. The fleet adjusted its direction and began 3 levels of acceleration. This also meant that the fleet was ready to head for the Cosmic Gate. The first 3 days of acceleration were very smooth. The soldiers on the warships could still work and rest as usual. Everyone was very nervous and very excited. They checked every detail of their cushion seats, afraid that something would go wrong. They didn't want to become a pile of flesh and blood when the Empire's fleet passed through the space tunnel for the first time because the Y-type tether suddenly stopped working. After all, this was a historical space travel. No one knew what would happen when the fleet passed through the space tunnel, and whether there would be any accidents. The naturally formed warp holes in the universe connected the star systems that even light felt distant. The farther the distance between the 2 star systems, the higher the energy level of the space tunnel, and the more terrifying the ray storm inside. In the past, the Empire's space technology could only use the warp holes to achieve space navigation within the Empire. For the 2 giant space tunnels that connected the Empire and the Federation, there was nothing they could do. The larger the mass of the object that passed through the warp holes, the more ray storms it would cause, and the higher the death rate. In the past, the Empire could only send light warships with extremely small mass through the space tunnel, and the interval between each teleportation was very long. They had to wait for the turbulence in the space tunnel to subside. Even so, there were still countless powerful special forces of the Empire that died silently in these 2 space tunnels. The extremely high death rate forced all the war plans of the military to be put on hold. Father was a prince back then, and he dared to ignore the extremely high death rate and force his way through the terrifying warp holes. Where did his courage come from? Huai Chaosher was not affected by the tense atmosphere in the warship. His mind was calm and clear. However, when he thought about the painful history of the Empire and the history that was happening around him, he couldn't help but feel a little excited and yearning. Suddenly, the warship began to tremble. Strange light particles appeared outside the porthole, and the violent acceleration pressed his body against the back of the cushioned seat. Huai Chaosher frowned slightly, and then his face returned to its cold and calm state. He slowly straightened his body, and the Y-shaped belt fell to the side. His arms were trembling, and he used his own body to resist this terrifying force. The fleet began to accelerate in the direction of the space tunnel for 10 days. The acceleration was very large, and the angle chosen was 45 degrees, which gave the people in the warship the illusion that they were ascending. It was as if the warship was escaping the gravitational force of the planet and flying into the sky. He closed his eyes and seriously experienced this feeling that he hadn't felt for a long time. He remembered sneaking out of the palace to play on the roller coaster when he was young. It was very exciting. Beauties are like famous horses, they all need to be trained. Chapter 556. It's so exciting. The little princess of the Zhong family in the West Woods screamed. At this time, her hands were tightly gripping the handrail in front of her. Her innocent eyes were extremely focused as she stared at the rapidly passing picture in front of her. Her black eyes were full of excitement and happiness. Her watermelon-skinned black hair swayed and fell in the blue sky like a tender flower gently opening and closing after the rain. Her hair cut the bright light from the sky into countless lines. As the high-speed roller coaster swooped down at high speed and decelerated when passing through the black hole, the lines gathered and scattered. This was the most beautiful late spring in the 70th year of the constitutional calendar. This was the most famous amusement park in Xixia State, and this was the happiest day for people. Zhong Huahua had once gone to an amusement park in her childhood, which had always made her secretly sad. However, today was different from that time. Her parents did not book an empty amusement park. In front of and behind the roller coaster seats, there were all her peers who were screaming in excitement and fear. This rare atmosphere made the little girl feel very good. But sitting next to her, Su Lu was in a very bad mood. When he came to Xixia State, Commander Zhong and his wife believed that he had enough ability to protect little Watermelon, so they agreed to their daughter's pleas and didn't choose to clear the amusement park. They let her play around crazily with Su Lu like a child from an ordinary family. However, just like last year in the amusement park under the cliff of Wood Valley Manor, the hurricane ship and the roller coaster made Su Lu very painful. His face was pale, and the smell of wormwood could be seen from his frown. The strongest physical fitness and military accomplishment in the world seemed to have no effect in front of these children's favorite thrills. Until he got off the roller coaster, he still felt that his legs were a little weak, and his chest and abdomen were a little uncomfortable. He seemed to want to vomit. When Li Feng went to the West Woods at the age of 12, I took him to the amusement park, but he was dismissive of these children's favorite things and was unwilling to try them. But 2 months later, after he killed someone on the front line for the first time, he sat in a daze for a whole night. Then, he entered the amusement park in the morning and rode the roller coaster 38 times in a row. At that time, everyone in the amusement park and I, who rushed over after receiving the news, were all dumbfounded. But no one expected that when this young boy got off the roller coaster, his expression was as silent as usual. He just asked me for a cigarette. To this day, I still remember that although the little guy's action of lighting the cigarette was clumsy and extremely unskilled, his lips holding the cigarette and fingers holding the lighter did not tremble at all. So after seeing your performance today, I really wonder if the rumors about you being on par with him in the Lin Yuan Club and winning the top mech battle at Khaki Peak are true. Today, Commander Zhong and his wife were disguised as an ordinary couple and ordinary parents. They were waiting for the two of them in the crowd below the roller coaster. At this time, Mrs. Zhong was holding her daughter's hand and listening to her chatter excitedly. Meanwhile, Zhong Suehu was looking at Su Lu mockingly and mercilessly saying offensive words. After Su Lu got off the roller coaster, he had been drinking ice water to calm his rapidly beating heart so that the sweat on his body would disappear sooner. When he thought of his previous embarrassing performance, especially in front of little Watermelon, he already felt very embarrassed. At this time, when he heard the mocking words of the big shot next to him, he finally couldn't help it. He gritted his teeth and retorted coldly. This is a psychological problem, not a problem of ability. As for Li Feng, he is a lunatic. I am not crazy. Because Su Lu came to Xixia State, the powerful Fatty Tian no longer needed to follow little Watermelon all the time. This person found a random reason to live his own life, so Su Lu took his place, including the seat at the dining table. For the rest of the lunch, the four of them ate at the fast food restaurant in the theme park. This was an arrangement that could not be any more ordinary. For the family of 3 from Serene, it was obviously a life that they had not experienced for a long time. Both the adults and the children were very satisfied. At the dining table, amidst the noise of the fast food restaurant and the smell of spicy fried food, Commander Zhong, who was dressed in casual clothes, still didn't stop mocking Su Lu. From the roller coaster to the Nebula award ceremony that he said had a very vomit-inducing effect, and then to Sulu innocently becoming a small soldier in the charge between the two major forces of the Federation, countless cold and indifferent analytical words were spat out from the mouth of the overlord of the West Woods. Suli's face turned even paler, and he was speechless. Mrs. Zhong couldn't listen to it anymore. She frowned and defended Sulu like an older sister, calmly refuting. Her willow eyebrows occasionally rose, and a fierce tiger naturally had to submit. Sulu had always thought that a big shot like Tiger would only think of strategies and schemes because he had spent so many years fighting against the Empire at the borders of Ceylon. Also, because he hadn't had a normal and healthy family life for too long, he would definitely have the same psychological problems as himself when facing the amusement facilities. That was why he didn't really care. But when he found that this person began to use a serious reprimanding tone towards the well-behaved and pitiful little watermelon, he finally couldn't help but frown. "You're a girl, but you only think about these boring things every day. You even shout and scream like a lunatic. What's wrong with you?" Commander Zhong looked at his daughter, who was silent with her head down, and reprimanded her sternly. "It's fine if you just play occasionally. Think about Li Feng. What was he doing when he was your age? Girl? Can a West Woods tiger be so naggy?" Sulu, who was chewing corn with his head down like the little girl beside him, couldn't help but shake his head. He wondered why Tiger Zhong always used that little lunatic as a comparison material. Did he not know that the guy was really a lunatic? Or did he want his daughter to be as crazy and violent in the future? Or was it because Tiger Zhong had always been disappointed that he didn't have a son, so he subconsciously looked at Madmanly as a son? Then wouldn't he be the son of the old man in Philadelphia? After a quick association, Sulu couldn't help but laugh. Commander Zhong frowned and asked, "What are you laughing at?" Sulu looked up at him and suddenly thought that his random inference might be true. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He felt that little watermelon was really a failure to have such a father. "Nothing. I just want to say that all outstanding and independent girls must like to ride roller coasters when they were young." Of course, he didn't know that his illogical inference, which was purely from little watermelon's standpoint, actually pointed to the distant end of the universe. And it was perfectly confirmed by someone who was excellent or even a genius. No one in the room could think of this. Commander Zhong and his wife listened to Su Li's serious and seemingly angry words. After being stunned for a while, they couldn't help but laugh. They truly and slightly surprised to find that this young man seemed to really dote on his daughter. The atmosphere of the four people was very good. Commander Zhong and his wife didn't make Su Lu feel too much like the big shots in the Federation. Amidst the joy and harmony, there was really a hint of a family dinner. It was a pity that even a feast would come to an end, let alone a fast food meal. 7 bulletproof military vehicles, under the stunned and shocked gaze of the people in the amusement park, drove to the entrance of the fast food restaurant and picked up the 4 people inside. In the back row of the car, Zhong Huashan's clear eyes began to fill with tears. She hid her head in her mother's arms and occasionally glanced at her father by the window. She whispered softly, "Mom, you have to come back soon." "Good girl, I'll come back as soon as possible," Mrs. Zhong said with a smile. "Dad, you too." The little girl plucked up her courage and looked at her father by the window with a serious expression. She said, "Like what Brother Su Lu said, after you win the last battle for the Federation, I'll go back to the West Woods to see you, okay?" At this moment, Commander Zhong's hard stone face, which seemed to be carved out of stone, finally relaxed a little. How long would it take to win the last battle for the Federation? How long would it take for his daughter to go back to her hometown in the West Woods after inheriting the family business? "Okay," he replied. General Zhong Suahu, the commander of the 4th Military Region of the Federation and the commander-in-chief of the enemies in the West Woods, finished his work report in the late spring of the 70th year of the constitutional calendar, and stepped on the return journey of the antique bell. The West Woods region, which had just wiped out the Imperial Expeditionary Force, needed him to be in charge. The Federation's long-planned attack on the mainland of the Empire also needed his cooperation and arrangements in the front line of the West Woods. In the eyes of many news media and political analysts, when the Federation attacked the mainland of the Empire, there was no doubt that only Fierce Tiger, who had just shown his genius military talent in the front line of the West Woods, was qualified and capable to be the commander-in-chief. Different from the usual return journey, this time, his wife, the CEO of the Antique Bell Company, Ms. Lingmin, would also go to the West Woods with him. This famous couple in the Federation chose the battleship-modified Antique Bell, but now the captain of the battleship had changed. On the surface, Mrs. Zhong was going back to the West Woods because of business needs, but only a few people knew that she was going back to the old mansion to deal with the problems of some of the Zhong family's relatives. Sulu didn't know this. At this time, he was quietly listening to Commander Zhong's words before he left. He felt that the spring breeze on the tarmac of the military base suddenly became a little cold. Last night at the official residence, I had the last conversation with President Pabre. I promised Mr. President that once the Federation starts to prepare the space tunnel strategy to attack the mainland of the Empire, I would be honored to be the commander-in-chief of the 3 armed forces. The silver hair in Zhong Shouhu's eyebrows trembled in the wind. After a moment of silence, he continued, "But the problem is that I still have a lot of differences with Mr. President in terms of the deployment of military forces and the allocation of resources. At the end of the conversation, our differences still can't be resolved." Sulu listened silently. Last time, when they talked by the pot of chili oil in the restaurant, plus some analysis, he knew very well what those differences meant. The Zhong family was the only family among the 7 families that had military power. They controlled the military and economic lifeline of the West Woods. How could the Federation government not be vigilant of this power that was similar to a separatist plot? If it wasn't for the glory of the Charter, perhaps the West Woods, which had been bleeding and sacrificing for the Federation, would have started to become independent long ago. In the face of such a political situation, it was difficult to have true trust between the government and the West Woods. President Pabre and his government, with great political wisdom and courage, chose Commander Zhong to be the commander-in-chief of this war. But they also had to worry about whether the West Woods would become stronger because of this, so they would definitely put forward their own strict requirements in terms of the allocation of resources and the number of troops directly controlled by the Zhong family. At this time, there can't be differences. Sulu might have the ability to solve the big problem that had troubled the Federation for countless years, but he could only lower his head and sigh. In the face of such a strong opponent like the Empire, there can't be differences, Zhong Shouhu said expressionlessly. Reducing the military power of the Zhong family, the transfer of grassroots officials across the region, and the integration of the West Woods into the political structure of the Federation. No matter from what perspective, such as the war against the Empire, or the long-term stability of the Federation, these actions are absolutely correct. Mr. President has also shown his sincerity, but I still can't agree to anything. For thousands of years, the Zhong family has always been the weakest link in the 7 families. Because of the long years of war, our relationship with the other 6 families is very distant and indifferent. Also, there are some old grudges from the development of Eastwood, so we have always been the prime target of the government. The lessons of history are very painful. The Federation doesn't dare to believe us, and we don't dare to believe the Federation. So we have to do whatever it takes. For example, my childhood, my daughter's childhood, and the growth of countless generations of Zhong family heirs, we have to hold the military power firmly in our hands. Only then can we have the power to talk to the government, and only then can we survive. The Zhong family is not my Zhong family, It is the Zhong family of the Zhong family. The words came to an abrupt end, just like the wind that suddenly stopped on the tarmac. Zhong Shouhu raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at the silent Su Lu with a trace of interest. He didn't want to send any message to the Lees of Philadelphia through Su Lu. In fact, all these years, because he was vaguely displeased or angry with the war god's strategy of taking turns to fight in the West Woods, he didn't even have any private contact with Philadelphia through Li Feng. He just wanted to say something to this interesting kid, but Zhong Shouhu didn't understand why he wanted to say something. In the end, he could only attribute it to Su Li's natural disposition that made people believe him. But this kid was just a guy who didn't know the dangers of the world and was only brave and righteous. He didn't know if there would be a day when he would meet with a bloody head, 4 youths? This damn fatty's description is quite accurate. Commander Zhong patted Su Li's shoulder and leaned over to hug his well-behaved daughter, which was rare for him. He turned around and said a few words to Colonel Lake, who was stationed at S1. Then he walked in front of his wife and walked towards the warship with a smile. The transport ship rose into the air, and the airflow on the tarmac was turbulent. Su Lu squinted his eyes to send them off in the dust until the warship turned into a small black dot in the atmosphere. The wind in spring was bleak, and Su Li's heart was slightly moved. He gently held little Watermelon's hand. At this moment, the phone in his clothes rang. I actually wrote 4,000 words. It's actually written well. It feels good. Chapter 557. The gentle voice of the president of the Nutshell Company came from the other end of the phone. Su Lu listened quietly. He didn't say much, but he was as straightforward as usual without any hesitation. After being pardoned from the military prison in Qincheng, he signed a bunch of complicated legal documents in front of General Miles in the president's official residence. From that moment on, his life could no longer be separated from the Federal Army. As a soldier, he had to follow orders unconditionally. After a short vacation, the Ministry of Defense assigned him a new mission. He would go to a secret base near the Gary Corridor with the new 17th Division to be in charge of security work. The secret base was built by the Nutshell Company. It was responsible for the future strategic significance of the Federation. The new 17th Division inherited the halo of the God of War and carried the strong aura of the Nutshell Group 7. It was natural that the Ministry of Defense and the Nutshell Company chose them at the same time. This was originally an ordinary conscription that only needed to be ordered by the Ministry of Defense or the 1st Military Region. However, considering the existence of Su Lu, the president of the Nutshell Company personally called to explain and ask for his opinion. As long as the division commander has no opinion, I have no opinion. As for the relevant itinerary and equipment preparation, it is more appropriate for the department to contact He directly. After all, he is the regiment commander. Okay, Mr. President. I look forward to the dinner you promised next time. Su Lu hung up the phone. In the blue sky above the base, there was no trace of the battleship. This was not 5460, and it was impossible to see the ancient clock that was far outside the atmosphere. He quietly looked at it for a while, then held the small watermelon's soft hand again and walked out of the base. He was in a hurry to leave because he didn't want to spend too much time with Colonel Lake from the West Woods Military Region. Although Colonel Lake wore sunglasses, he still had a deep impression of him. He didn't wear sunglasses today, so he was worried that he would be recognized. In a sense, Colonel Lake, who carried out the mission of the Bureau of Proclamation at Zhonglo Street in Donglin a few years ago, changed Su Li's life. The violent Special Forces soldier, the cold gun barrel, and the angry fist were a part of Su Li's deep and unpleasant memories. According to the old man, Su Lu had the authority of Sequence 1. He did not need to worry about being accused of being a fugitive from the Federation. However, no matter what, he did not want to be recognized by Colonel Lake. However, He did not know that Colonel Lake had started to pay attention to him after the assassination in the West Woods, Sunset State. Not including today, not including this time. Colonel Lake, who was wearing sunglasses, stood in the rustling wind and maintained a solemn posture. He looked up at the sky, as if he was still sending off the officer he admired the most in his life. His expression was somewhat complicated, and he did not notice Sue Lee's departure at all. Spring, year 70 of the constitutional calendar, April 15th. The Tiger of the West Woods and his wife left S1 and boarded the Ancient Belle. Under the escort of 4 light feather-class warships, they embarked on their journey back to their hometown in the West Woods. At 3:12 in the afternoon, Sulu handed over Little Watermelon to Tion Stickman and then rushed back to the Capital Special District to prepare for the upcoming mission. Almost at the same time, the Ghost Fleet, composed of 57 light-class warships, quietly sailed through the vast and barren star field at the border of the Empire and arrived at an empty place. This place was far away from the galaxy, in the dead and dark space within 18 light-years, except for the traces of the fleet's engine and the interstellar dust that had been floating alone for billions of years. There were no large celestial bodies that could be seen with the naked eye. The whole background was empty and quiet. No one would have thought that this was the entrance to a certain door in the universe. Through this door, one could see the world at the other end of the distant star field. Spring, year 70 of the constitutional calendar, April 19th. The next day, Sulu, who was going to leave on a warship, thought for a long time and called Shang Qiu. Shang Qiu said on the other side of the phone that she was very busy, so they did not meet. Then, he finally called Nan Xiangmei and the two of them met up for dinner. At night, he looked at Zhang Xiaoming's number that he had saved on his phone and shook his head. In the end, he did not call Jian Shuer. At 3:37 in the morning, the Ministry of National Defense and the Nutshell Company sent the specific information of this mission to his top-secret military mailbox. At the same time, there was an additional clause. Then, the Federal Central Computer provided him with more detailed information. In the information picture, the secret base located in the outer star field of the Gary Corridor was extremely magnificent. It was like a huge metal asteroid, indifferently suspended in the unchanging black space. After the completion of this base, it would become the base camp for the Federal forces to attack the Empire and the most important strategic transfer base for the Federation. The Nutshell Company was the largest megacorporation in the Federation. 30 years ago, they had received an order from the Federation government to build a transfer base. Even with the Nutshell Company's terrifying production capabilities, they still had to invest so much time and effort to complete the basic construction of this base. It was easy to imagine how magnificent this space base was. In fact, of the secret military budget that the Federation Parliament reviewed behind closed doors every year, at least 60% was invested in this space base. As a result, the government's budget deficit had increased sharply in recent years. From this, one could imagine how much effort and investment the Federation government, especially the Pabre government that had been accelerating this project ever since it took office. Sulu and the new 17th Division's mission this time was to ensure the safety of this important space base. Although the Empire had reduced the number of suicidal special mecha traversal attempts in the past 2 years, and the Gary Corridor and the Night Scorpion Nebula had been peaceful for a long time, according to the importance of this space base, no amount of caution was necessary. Other than protecting the space base, there was also an additional clause from the Bureau of Proclamation. The new 17th Division's first team would spend 7 months to set up a space network and infiltrate the data of the space base. This was to prepare for the all-out war that would break out in the next year or two, as well as provide strategic support for the Federal Forces' collective traversal of the space base in the future. After memorizing the information, Sulu rinsed his mouth and washed his face. He glanced at the street view below Wangdu Condominium and then went to bed. Before going to bed, he thought of little Watermelon, so he gave her a call. He coaxed the little girl, whose parents were not around, and then fell into a deep sleep peacefully and happily. At this time, the ancient bell was cruising at level 2 cruise speed, steadily and steadily continuing its journey. It went around the military-restricted area in front of it and followed the passage next to the Night Scorpion Nebula. At this time, other than a few people on both sides of the universe, no one knew that the Empire's ghost fleet led by Butcher Catan was moving forward with difficulty in the seemingly endless dark passage filled with turbulence of particles and storms. The suspended reflector on the outer shell of the Empire's battleship was rubbing against the turbulence of particles that were beyond human imagination. It seemed like it could be penetrated at any time and then turned into ashes. Year 70 of the Federation's constitutional calendar, 27th of April. The ancient bell was still cruising smoothly. The spaceship that was modified from a battleship completely ignored the interference of cosmic rays. The electronic monitoring system followed the program and carried out a flawless probe at a certain frequency from 360 angles. The gentle music inside the spaceship blended together with the mellow aroma of coffee. The people traveling in space still lamented the monotonous and boring life and the lack of excitement. Far ahead, in the space at the edge of the Night Scorpion Nebula, there was a strange change. Waves of dim light suddenly appeared in the calm space. These light waves appeared for a very short time and then disappeared in an instant. It was like a hard metal membrane that was knocked by the delicate fingers of a baby. A pure black metal horn quietly penetrated the membrane and came to this part of the universe. Then, the object behind the metal horn also penetrated the membrane and gradually revealed the appearance of a battleship. The second battleship, the third battleship. Dozens of Empire's battleships penetrated the membrane that didn't actually exist and appeared in the universe of the Federation in a dark and cold manner. A cold and indifferent aura spread out in the space. These Empire's battleships that forced their way through the space passage trembled violently because of the strong space pressure. It was like they finally arrived in the universe of the Federation and smelled the scent of the enemy. They were so excited and nervous that they couldn't control themselves. In the space inside the fleet of Empire's battleships, countless excited screams and exclamations were echoing. The porthole panels were not closed. The soldiers of the Empire watched the scene outside the battleships through the light curtain and truly felt the greatness of a certain history that was happening. They discovered that this strange universe that belonged to the people of the Federation was as beautiful and moving as their hometown. Different from the shock and speechlessness of the ordinary soldiers, the officers of the ghost fleet of the Empire forcibly suppressed the excitement in their hearts and nervously devoted themselves to their work under the stern reprimand of their superiors. They knew very well that it was one thing to pass through the space passage, but it was another difficult task to not be discovered by the glory of the Charter of the Federation. In the past, the Empire could only teleport objects of low quality, such as the mini-spaceships of the Mecha Warriors. These mini-spaceships had a high possibility of being destroyed in the space passage, but once they successfully passed through the space passage, the possibility of escaping the glory of the Charter's surveillance in the vast space of the universe was also relatively high. Now, the Empire had finally made history by teleporting an entire medium-sized fleet, but the space fluctuation caused by it was also very easy for the glory of the Charter to detect. Only 37 seconds left. 35. 34. Sitting on the command platform with a violent expression on his face, Prince Catan coldly stared at the trajectories of all the battleships and turned on the signal blocking system. His expression was unprecedentedly serious, and the staff officer beside him was loudly counting down to the battleship commanders. 14. 13. Success. The advisor turned around and looked at Duke Carlton as he reported in excitement. Prince Catan's expression didn't change, but his entire body relaxed. A cruel expression flashed across his chubby face, and he murmured to himself in his mind, People of the Federation, groan in pain. Prince Doring will be immortal, but you will have to pay the price for this hatred. Relying on the chip and related information that Macklin sent back to the Empire, and relying on the intelligence of the last seed that the Empire hid in the Federation, the Empire made the most accurate calculation of the density of the net that the Bureau of Proclamation of the Federation set up outside the space passage. In an extremely short amount of time, dozens of light battleships turned on all of their engines and forcefully changed their trajectories, driving into the only dark gap that was shining in the light. The background of the universe was dark, and the ghost-like fleet of the Empire formed a long and narrow line in the universe of the Federation, twisting and moving forward like a poisonous snake, avoiding the invisible dangers and preparing to launch the most vicious and sudden attack on the target that was about to pass by. Chapter 558. The light gray, metallic Federation transport ship traveled at a constant speed in the low-dimensional space of the Night Scorpion Nebula. The 3,000 soldiers of the new 17th Division on the transport ship had returned to their hometowns for less than 100 days of vacation before they were forced to set off on a journey again. Naturally, they were not in a good mood. As soon as they left the region of Upper Forest, homesickness began to spread. For the commanding officer of the army, this kind of mood was undoubtedly negative and dangerous. Fortunately, the purpose of this trip was not to attack the Empire, but to be responsible for the security of the forward base. For Sulu, homesickness was not the main emotion he was feeling right now. He looked at the exceptionally beautiful woman with long black hair in front of him and felt more surprise and a heavy responsibility. He never would have thought that Jian Shui would actually appear in the transport ship and become a female reporter following the army. What surprised him even more and made him feel a little sad and empty was that the nation's girl, whom the nation hadn't seen for a long time, after taking off her white cap, her black hair flowed out like a waterfall. There was no trace of the vigorous purple in the deepest part of his memory back then. A debate that was not intense but was somewhat stubborn occurred between the young man and woman. Bai Yulan and the other officers were extremely tactful and left the cabin early. Looking at the beautiful face in front of him that was still as beautiful as before and the black hair that spread slightly over her shoulders, Sulu vaguely understood why she had made such a big change. He sighed in his heart and was about to say something when his eyes narrowed. "I have something to take care of," he said to Jian Shuer, and then turned to return to his cabin. Jian Shuer looked at his resolute back and revealed an innocent expression. She spread out her hands cutely and said, "This is my own hair. Why are you so angry?" Sulu knew that he had no reason to be angry at someone for changing her hairstyle. It was boring and absurd, but he was still angry because that purple color, for him, meant too many memories and traces of his life. But at this moment, he quickly walked back to his cabin and left the other party with a cold back. It was not because he was being childish, but because a line of white characters suddenly appeared in his black left eye. After that night in the camp, the old thing rarely contacted him, so at that moment, he was somewhat surprised and nervous. What exactly had happened? No specific data? Sulu sat on the edge of the bed and asked in confusion, "But your existence is based on logic and information capture. Without any valid information, how do you know that something big is going to happen in the Federation?" Chaos calculation. I cannot list the calculation process. I only know that countless subtle variables are causing a data turbulence as time passes. Based on your first-rank authority, I'll officially report the first cause of change to you. After the Medellin project, the Bureau of Proclamation cooperated with the Federation to carry out the cleanup work. However, on November 23, 2 years ago, the data cleanup work I was in was terminated. According to the prior data prediction, one of the Empire's seeds is currently outside the surveillance range. Hearing this, Su Li's brows furrowed even more. He clenched his hands tightly and quickly asked, "Where is this seed now?" No authorization, no corresponding monitoring report has been generated, the Federal Central Computer replied. I know you know where he is. Sulu lowered his head and clenched his fists. The suspected target of the Empire's seed is currently in S2. Who is the person who terminated the investigation authorization? Assistant Director Chui Judong. Sulu narrowed his eyes. He knew this Assistant Chui Judong. He knew that this person was the only candidate to be the next director of the Bureau of Proclamation by the Federation. Why would he terminate the investigation authorization? If even a Federation official of this level had a problem, how serious would the situation be? Then this muddled calculation of yours. He changed the verb. Where exactly is the problem that you've guessed? I can't be sure. Why didn't you warn me before? Because these things have nothing to do with you. But now, according to my chaos calculation, this matter will be related to you. F***ck your chaos calculation. Sulu cursed softly as he rubbed his hair. His heart was filled with unprecedented frustration and fear of the unknown. The alarm sounded mournfully. Accompanied by the gentle music and the aroma of coffee, the ancient bell that had been sailing peacefully for many days suddenly sounded the alarm. The defense system of the spaceship automatically switched the energy supply port. The dim yellow light replaced the bright light, and countless warning lights flashed continuously. Locked on by long-range weapons. Locked on by long-range weapons. 32 degrees of acceleration. Hold on tight. Anxious shouts sounded continuously in the command system. The ancient bell's engine group suddenly accelerated and dodged at high speed towards the calm space above. After a violent tremor, a loud sound came from the rear of the spaceship. An explosion occurred on the rear right side of the ancient bell. The huge force knocked the people in the cabin to the ground. At that moment, it seemed that there were more than 10 dangerous jets that brushed past the spaceship. If all of these weapons had hit the spaceship, the consequences would have been unimaginable. What's going on? The officers on the ancient bell struggled to get up and rushed back to their post. They roared angrily and confusedly. They were in the Federation's space. How could the pirates of the Bermuda Triangle dare to attack the ancient bell? They have our electronic frequency. Immediately change the data and find them. The urgent voice in the command system was still going on. The ancient bell and the 4 frigates beside it had brushed shoulders with death several times due to the sudden attack. The people on the frigates still did not know what had happened. They angrily and helplessly tried to change the current passive situation, thinking that it was the stupidest pirates in Bermuda who did not recognize the serene symbol on the ancient bell. Some of the serene soldiers even thought that this might be a conspiracy of the government, but no one connected this attack to the Empire. The electronic codes on the ancient bell and the 4 battleships were quickly adjusted randomly, and the surrounding dark space was converted into a visual image and entered into the hologram in the command hall. The soldiers saw a scene that made them speechless, and the interior of the battleships fell into a dead silence. In the dark space, with the beautiful stars of the night Scorpion Nebula as the background, dozens of dark light frigates appeared around the ancient bell. They were like ghosts that crawled out of hell and quietly blocked all the passages. The soldiers of the West Woods looked at the hologram in shock. They looked at the black fleet that ambushed them. They were unfamiliar with this kind of frigate, but they were also familiar with it. They were unfamiliar because they had never appeared in the Federation's space before. They were familiar with it because there were many wreckages of this kind of frigate in the desolate star field outside the West Wood. These frigates all had a beast-shaped bow, and the black hibiscus flag was deeply engraved on the frigate with a laser knife. It was said that it would never decay. "It's the Empire!" A shout came from the ancient bell, followed by countless exclamations. Everyone's pupils shrank at this moment. The soldiers of the West Woods were angry, shocked, and confused. The Empire's fleet appeared in the Federation's space. Regarding this attack that shocked the entire universe, the Federation conducted a special investigation that lasted for 2 years after the incident. Those heavy introspection and reflection discussions lasted for decades. 2 years later, when the investigation report was reviewed on Parliament Hill, a middle-aged senator from the West Woods asked a lot of why and ifs angrily and sorrowfully. Why was an important commander of the federal military not escorted by the federal fleet when he traveled? The West Woods Military District had never accepted the escort of the federal fleet. This was an old rule that had been passed down for many years. It was a strong habit of the military. Without this old rule and habit, and strictly followed the military regulations of the Federation, would the Empire's shameless sneak attack have failed. The Federation General and the representative of the West Woods Zhong family were silent and did not express any opinions. Why was the patrolling density of the Federation's fleets so low at the Gary Corridor and the Night Scorpion Nebula, the two most important spatial passageways? Why was the Ancient Bell unable to receive timely assistance when it was attacked? Why was it that, other than the first transport ship, the first to rush to the rescue was actually Cylon's civilian spaceship? If the Federation government's budget could first satisfy the Bureau of Proclamations' request to set up a net there, and if the Federal fleet could increase the cruising frequency, could this tragedy have been prevented? The Federal Fleet General Hong Yuliang's explanation was that the space passage was too wide. It was not a small warp hole that the general public knew. Even if all the Federation's battleships were to set up a tight defense, it would only be like an ant trying to defend the entire charter square. However, this point would be improved significantly after the forward base was put into use. In the spring of year 70 of the constitutional calendar, a part of the Federal Fleet's main force was transferred to the Barren Star Field at the edge of the West Woods region to annihilate the backup fleet of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. In fact, the transferred Federal Fleet had achieved great results in that star field. However, because of this, the monitoring of the space passage had indeed decreased by a lot. The Federation government's budget department's reply was, since President Pabre took office, he had already increased the budget of the Bureau of Proclamation to the maximum. If he added more, it might lead to serious financial problems. Most importantly, the first charter clearly stated that the Bureau of Proclamation's budget could fluctuate, and the government had no authority to change it. There were many questions and reasons for the reply, but in fact, from the president to the ordinary citizens, everyone knew that the reason for the tragedy was that the Federation had never imagined that the Empire had the ability to send an entire fleet, even if it was only a medium-sized fleet, through the space passage. No one had thought of it, not a single person. This frightening inertia of thinking caused the Federation to pay a heavy price. Of course, if that the West Woods senator said could be realized, perhaps this attack would not have turned out to be the final result. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in history. Therefore, at this moment, the Ancient Bell and the man with a special identity were being mercilessly hunted down by the Empire's fleet. The quiet space in front of the Night Scorpion Nebula was now filled with silent explosions and circular dust rings. Dozens of modified black battleships of the Empire shuttled through space at high speed, and the weapons on the battleships fired fiercely. The Ancient Bell, which had withstood the first round of sneak attacks with its super-solid alloy hull armor, had lost part of its power due to the explosion at the rear left of the ship. One of the 4 corvettes on the ship had turned into a firework in the universe. It was not lonely, but tragic. Under the cover of the remaining 3 West Woods battleships, the Ancient Bell's engine group risked a 2-stage merger and tried to forcefully accelerate and escape. However, under the suicidal attacks of the Empire's Spectre fleet, the acceleration process was constantly interrupted, and the situation was extremely dangerous. Commander, there's a signal feedback. The nearest fleet is a transport ship 33. 7 astronomical units away. Under the dim flickering lights, A West Woods officer with sweat and blood flowing down his face looked at the back of the figure outside the porthole and said with a trembling voice. He was not afraid of death, and he was not afraid of the Empire, but he was afraid that the back of the figure in front of him would disappear in this universe because of his and his comrades' incompetence. Continue to call for backup, but limit it to the military channel. Don't let those civilian spaceships rush over to die. Zhong Shouhu's right hand gripped the back of the chair tightly as he looked at the fierce battle outside the window expressionlessly. Until now, both sides were still attacking with long-range weapons and did not use the carrier fleet. However, when the Ancient Bell and the other 3 battleships used up all of their main cannons but still could not destroy the command ship of the Empire's ambush fleet, the outcome of this ambush was already clear. The difference in strength between the enemy and himself was too great. Even though he had been dominating the universe for many years and looked down on Du Shaoqin coldly, he still could not turn the situation around. Commanding a battleship is not my forte. Tell the troops to fight as much as they can. Take down as many ships as they can. Commander, I like to see these fireworks the most. Zhong Shouhu's lips curled up slightly as he smiled and gently patted his wife's shoulder. Mrs. Zhong's face was slightly pale as she sat in the chair. Her left hand grabbed the hem of his military uniform tightly. She hit the corner of the wall in the first wave of attack, and a trace of blood flowed out of her forehead. Her usual calm and magnanimous expression now looked weak and helpless. Yes, Commander, the West Woods officer replied with a trembling voice. He then held the wall and quickly ran to the control room. Calculate the number of battleships of the Empire and send the panoramic image back to S1. Tell the Federation that the Empire can pass through the space channel. The smile on Zhong Shouhu's face gradually disappeared. He said to the officers behind him in a deep voice, "The maximum number of battleships they can send over at one time is probably what we saw." This judgment came from his clear understanding of his own importance. The Empire had developed the technology to pass through the space channel in an attempt to kill him. They would definitely put in all the forces they could at one time. If they wanted to kill the Tiger of the West Woods, how could they say that they would win without using all their strength? Hearing the commander's words, the West Woods officers on the Ancient Bell were all silent for a moment. They quickly returned to their positions and prepared for the last battle of their lives. As the most important commander of the federal military, Zhong Shouhu was still most concerned about the fate of the Federation when his life was in danger and could end at any time. If those people who were vigilant against the West Woods saw this scene, would they have a different opinion in their hearts? In this most dangerous moment, the Ancient Bell reassembled its engine group and made a new torque adjustment. Under the cover of the 3 frigates, it attempted to accelerate for the last time. The 3 frigates turned into perfectly round and scattered fireworks in front of the people on the Ancient Bell. Just as the Ancient Bell was about to reach the critical speed and escape from the battlefield and get rid of the ghostly fleet of Empire's battleships, the hull of the Empire's battleships suddenly cracked open. More than 100 Empire's mechas rushed towards the Ancient Bell at high speed. Seeing his subordinates turn into ashes silently in space, Zhong Shouhu narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, he saw the next move of the Empire's fleet and narrowed his eyes even more. He said in a cold voice, "Leaving the ship to fight? Your Majesty, you are really willing to pay any price to kill me." The Empire's mechas that took the risk of boarding the ship in a vacuum didn't even have the time to touch the Ancient Bell before they were destroyed by the dense close-range firepower of the Ancient Bell. However, the remaining Empire's Wolf Fang mechas were still slowly approaching without fear of death. Zhong Shouhu's eyes fell on the approaching mechas. He found that these mechas were very strange and their speed was obviously faster than before. He slowly raised his white eyebrows and said to his subordinates, "Tell the Federation another piece of bad news. The Empire's new mechas have also been successfully developed. Also, remind them that the Empire's people have the ability to go back through the space passage. Because they want to capture me alive. Lastly, tell S1 and the Westwoods that there is a traitor among us. The Empire's Ghost Fleet actually knew the electronic code of the ancient bell and was able to avoid the detection of the glory of the Charter. All these details proved that there was someone hiding in the dark within the Federation and even around him. Thinking of a loyal subordinate, a mocking smile appeared on Zhong Shouhu's face. He didn't know whether he was mocking the Empire's enemy for trying to capture him alive or mocking himself for being a hero who was now in a desperate situation because of some traitor or spy. At this time, the Empire's mechas finally broke through the close-range firepower of the ancient bell. Like countless nails, they fiercely hammered into the thick alloy wall of the spaceship. The sound of metal clashing could be heard clearly from the inside of the spaceship. The soldiers' faces were pale as they rushed over and shouted, "Protect the commander and his wife as they leave." However, what happened next proved Zhong Shouhu's previous judgment. The three systems of the ancient bell had been holding on strongly during the fierce battle, but the escape system of the spaceship had a problem. "This is good. I can be with the soldiers in the end." Zhong Shouhu's face was expressionless as he held his wife's hand. He lowered his head and said gently, "Ever since we graduated from the first academy, I've always walked in front of you in public. I've never held your hand, let alone hugged you. Can you give me a chance to make it up to you today?" Mrs. Zhong calmed down a little. She took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood on her forehead. After calming down, she looked at him and forced a smile. She said as casually as possible, "I will only give you one last chance." Chapter 560. The thick bulkhead completely isolated the noisy footsteps and screams from the outside world. Amidst the low and clear sound of hydraulic pipes and motors, Zhong Shouhu took a deep breath and opened his eyes. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes. His steel-like hands finally left the back of his wife's hand and landed on the touchscreen and operation stick. He hadn't been on the battlefield for many years. How could he be unfamiliar with the controls? Would the mecha under him still be as crazy and courageous as before? "Commander, we've contacted the warship behind us. It's a Chandran-class transport ship. There's a regiment of the new 17th Division on it. If we can hold on, there might be hope." The Chandran-class transport ship was one of the largest transport ships in the federal military. Other than carrying a lot of people, its own defense system was very advanced. In addition, the mecha group and the mecha regiment had the ability to fight in all areas. If the enemy could make it, then maybe it was just like what the Westwoods officer in the system said. Zhong Shouhu looked at the battle situation on the screen quietly. His facial expression was a little unpredictable because of the flashing lights in the mecha cabin. Mrs. Zhong, who was sitting silently beside him, suddenly grabbed his hand tightly. She had a pleading look on her face. Zhong Shouhu knew what his wife wanted to say. He smiled and said, "I understand. That little guy is indeed on that warship." He pressed the call button and connected to the Federation transport ship that was very far away. He asked calmly, "Is Su Lu there?" After a while, Su Li's trembling voice came from the other end of the call. It was obvious that he was panicking. "Commander, I'm here. Help me take care of Yen Huahua." "Yes." Zhong Shouhu heard the young man's answer and let out a sigh of relief. That damn fatty was too impulsive. He didn't know what kind of crazy things he would do after he died. It was really not reassuring to entrust his daughter to him. He didn't hesitate to cut off the call. He pushed the control stick and the heavy mecha drove towards the upper space of the ancient bell. Just a while ago, the Empire's fierce new mecha group finally broke through the solid alloy wall of the spaceship and crazily killed their way in. His face became calmer and his expression became more relaxed. However, there was an unprecedented determination and fierceness in his eyes. Inside the spaceship, which was separated by countless alloy walls, countless fierce battles were ringing out. The electric arcs shot out by the electromagnetic beam bombs burned the walls, making sizzling noises. There were corroded holes and smoke everywhere from the weapons shot out. The Empire's new mecha were like a pack of bloodthirsty beasts. They broke through the outer shell of the spaceship and madly made their way to the lower levels. At this time, there were not many mechas that had entered the spaceship, but these new mechas that were dodging at high speed like black ghosts made the completely unprepared Westwoods soldiers pay a heavy price. Many standard anti-mecha weapons missed. Black smoke billowed and explosions rang out, but they could not stop the beast tide for even a moment. The Empire's new Wolf Fong mecha squad charged all the way to the target area before finally coming to a stop. It wasn't because they wanted to regroup and complete the plan in one go, but because they were forced to stop because a Black Federation mecha with no insignia had appeared in front of them. Behind this mecha was the Silan military's direct subordinate Special Mecha Battalion. Looking at the Black Empire mechas in front of him, Zhong Shouhu raised his eyebrows in the cockpit. He was like a sharp sword that had been bound by a floral cloth for many years and was finally about to break free. He said to his subordinates in a deep voice, "Battle." As the most important military commander of the Federation and the most powerful person in the West Woods, Zhong Shouhu rarely had the chance to personally operate a mecha and participate in a battle. In fact, after surrendering to Du Xinghuan and returning to the West Woods to inherit his family business, no one had seen him operate a mecha and roar like a tiger on the battlefield. People may fear his power and be amazed by his commanding ability, but very few people paid attention to his mecha battle skills. Only the Federation's god of war, Li Pifu, once gave this fierce tiger of the West Woods the highest praise in a private conversation by Lake Feiqing. Countless mechas broke through the restraints of space and fiercely collided with each other. Some cockpits were destroyed, some sparks flew, and there was a dull and deafening sound of metal tearing. The mecha battle on the ancient bell started silently and coldly, and ended violently and quickly. There were about 20 or so Imperial Wolf Fong mechs that had infiltrated the spaceship and appeared on this platform. These new mechs relied on their superior maneuverability and evasion rate in small spaces to successfully destroy 11 of the Silan's Special Mech Battalion's mechs. However, they paid the inconceivable price of having all their mechs explode. This was because of the excellent operation skills of the West Woods Special Mecha Battalion's pilots, because of the fearless spirit displayed by the West Woods soldiers in the last battle, but more importantly, because of the black mecha that charged into the most intense battle like a black ray of light, like an unstoppable god, charging into the most intense battle. The Black Federation mecha without any insignia stood on the chaotic platform among the wreckage of the Empire's mechas. It slowly retracted the alloy knife in front of its right mechanical arm. It was cold and silent, seemingly invincible, but in reality, it was invincible. The ejection device at the west corner is ready. The command officer of the spaceship reported loudly from the cockpit system. Zhong Shouhu raised his eyebrows and smiled. He muttered to himself softly, "You want to capture me alive? I also want to try to kill my way into your spaceship and capture your commander alive." In the Empire's Ghost Fleet, there was a light battleship that was exactly the same as the other light battleship. It didn't participate in the fierce attacks of its comrades. Instead, it coldly hid in the formation and watched the intense battle in space. In a normal repair room in the lower level of the battleship, the thin and small Hui Chaosher had been quietly watching the battle through his personal channel. He watched as the fleet successfully ambushed the opponent, besieged the opponent, destroyed 4 Federation frigates, and the Empire's mechas infiltrated the ancient bell. After that, there was silence. There was no more sound. After a while, the battle footage recorded by the mechas that infiltrated the ancient bell was sent back. Looking at the terrifying black mecha on the screen, Hui Chaosher slowly narrowed his eyes. The Empire's mechas that carried out the capture plan were actually annihilated. The tiger from the West Woods was actually so ferocious in the Mecca. At this moment, he finally understood why His Majesty was so indifferent towards the capture plan. It was probably because His Majesty was very clear that a person like Zhong Shouhu couldn't be defeated by a mecha. For the first time, Huai Chaoshi had a strong desire to fight. He really wanted to fight with that arrogant black mecha. At this moment, his sharp eyes noticed that the ancient bell was making a difficult and risky adjustment in the midst of the bullet. A piece of alloy panel beside the spaceship was opening up, revealing the dark interior of the spaceship. The direction was facing the spaceship that he was in. What was this tiger trying to do? Huai Chaoshi narrowed his eyes even more. Suddenly, he understood what the tiger was trying to do. His eyes narrowed, and a trace of ridiculousness and shock appeared in his heart. This tiger was already in a hopeless situation, yet he was still so arrogant as to try to kill the Empire's commander with him? A strong sense of danger surged into his heart. He pushed open the cabin door and quickly walked towards a certain part of the spaceship. There was a wolf Fong mecha that was covered in dust waiting for him. Duke Carlton's emotions were more ridiculous than anyone else's. He looked at the ancient bell in shock as it adjusted its position for the last time. He guessed what the tiger wanted to do, and his face became very ugly. The mechas he sent were all killed by the opponent. The opponent was clearly in a losing situation, but he dared to carry out such a crazy plan. Who was the one who had the upper hand in this space battle? Why did that target give him the feeling that he, the hunter, was the target instead? Because of some kind of fear, he waved his hand angrily and shouted loudly, "Give up the plan, kill him!" The ejection mechanism of the ancient bell couldn't be activated in the end. The black mecha controlled by Zhong Shouhu also lost its last chance to shine. This was because under the orders of the Empire's commander, the battleships that were cruising around the ancient bell at high speed gave him the final shot that they had prepared for a long time. At the same time, the mechas that invaded the interior of the ancient bell also self-destructed, according to the last part of the interdimensional hunting plan. The 20 Wolf Fong mechas that were turned into wreckage on the platform became powerful explosive. The rest of the mechas that invaded the engine system of the spaceship successfully used their self-destruction to destroy the last power system of the ancient bell. The sound of explosions came one after another inside and outside the spaceship. The high temperature of the flames burned the thin space. The flames spat out of the cabin and then suddenly retracted. The scene was extremely tragic. The ancient bell that had held on for so long was finally destroyed. Huai Chaoshi, who was preparing to open the screen of the mecha, saw this scene on the screen. His body froze slightly. Then, he silently turned around and walked back to his room. He thought to himself, "It's a pity that such a person didn't get a chance to fight fairly in the end." There was a huge hole on the right side of the ancient bell. The explosion below the spaceship continued. Countless metal fragments and the bodies of the West Woods soldiers were smashed and burned. The right arm of the black mecha held on tightly to the metal strip beside the hole and didn't float out. Opposite the black mecha was a silent universe with stars as the background. There was no sound at all. It was so beautiful that it was terrifying. In the cockpit of the mecha, Madame Zhong, whose face was pale, was trembling. She weakly leaned on his side and said, "I'm scared." Another explosion rang out, and a gorgeous red light occupied the huge gap. The scene of the universe that made one's heart palpitate was like the setting sun. "We're together, don't be scared." Zhong Shouhu looked at the sea of stars and looked at the way home. He hugged his wife tightly and buried her face in his thick chest. He comforted her with a gentle voice, don't look," and then he died. Chapter 561. The moment the ancient bell was attacked, Su Lu knew about it. The warning message of the Federal Central Computer flashed in his left eye. At that moment, his left eye seemed to turn red, making him feel annoyed and cold. He pushed open the cabin door and ran to the central control room of the transport ship. He shouted anxiously, "Contact the ancient bell." The Federal officers in the central control cabin didn't know what had happened to make Lieutenant Colonel Sulu so anxious. They looked at him in bewilderment, their hands moving a little slower. "What the F***ck are you waiting for?" Sulu roared angrily. "Find the navigation map of the ancient bell and chase after it." In the transport ship, besides the captain, Sulu's deputy had the highest military rank. However, when he asked to change the navigation route for no reason, the officers who were driving the ship did not dare to follow his order immediately. They all looked at the captain beside the porthole. The captain with black curly hair frowned slightly and asked, "Lieutenant Colonel Sulu, what happened?" At this time, Sulu did not consider that saying that the ancient bell was attacked would expose the mysterious connection between him and the Federal Central Computer. He quickly said, "The ancient bell." A beep sound interrupted his words. The communication officer of the warship stood up in shock and said with a trembling voice, "Received a Level 1 emergency signal. The ancient bell was attacked." This news made all the officers in the central control room of the warship stand up in shock. The black-haired captain looked at the communication officer in disbelief. His voice was slightly distorted as he said, "Verify the situation immediately." The situation did not need to be verified because the anxious and painful voice of the officers on the ancient bell could be clearly heard from the other end of the interstellar communication. They could also faintly hear the dull sound of an explosion. All the officers and soldiers in the transport ship froze for a moment at this moment. Then, they spread out and quickly sent the information to the space base behind according to the fixed procedure. At the same time, they confirmed the location of the ancient bell. The officers and soldiers of the Federation forcibly suppressed the shock in their hearts and carried on with their work. However, their ears were nervously listening to the sound coming from the front. The fleet of the Empire that ambushed the ancient bell? The fleet of the Empire could quietly pass through the space channel? There were spies from the Empire within the Federation and the West Woods? In the spacious control room of the battleship, because of the accurate information sent back by the ancient bell, which was in the middle of a fierce battle, there was dead silence. "Is Sulu here?" The deep and calm voice of a middle-aged man came from the communication system. The black-haired captain and some of the officers recognized who this voice belonged to. Thinking that he was surrounded by a fleet, they could not help but panic. Knowing that he was still alive, at least at this moment, Sulu gently clenched his fist, took 2 steps forward, and said into the communication system with a trembling voice, "Commander, I'm here. Help me take care of the fireworks." Sulu clenched his fists even tighter when he heard this sentence. He felt a strong sense of foreboding. He really didn't want to answer this sentence, but after 2 deep breaths, he only paused for a moment before seriously and simply replying, "I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Yes. The communication with the ancient bell was cut off at this moment. The officers and soldiers on the sinking ship waited nervously for a long time, but they did not hear any sound from the front. Sulu finally confirmed that it was probably the last time he heard the tiger's voice. After a moment of silence, he narrowed his eyes, lowered his head slightly and said to the captain, "When can the second level of acceleration be completed?" "At least an hour. The load of the transport ship is too heavy. The most important thing is that the ancient bell is too far away from us. At full speed, it will take at least 5 days." The black-haired captain replied with a heavy expression, "It's too late." Sulu raised his wrist and looked at the mission manual on his phone screen. He whispered a few words into the communication system, then raised his head and said, "I know that there is a tri-wing ship used by the Bureau of Proclamation in the battleship. It was supposed to be sent to the forward base, but I want to use it temporarily." The black-haired captain immediately understood what he wanted to do. His expression became more serious as he said, The tri-wing ship is indeed the fastest aircraft in the Federation, but it will take at least 30 hours to reach the location where the ancient bell was attacked. Even if you go, you can't change anything. At this moment, Bai Yulan, Xiong Linquan, and the rest of the members of Group 7 had arrived outside the central control room of the battleship. They received Su Li's group communication and left their respective combat units without hesitation to gather. The captain glanced at the officers who were preparing their weapons outside the cabin and noticed the depressed and frustrated expression of the officers in the room. He said with a painful expression, "Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, you have to know what you are doing. Wake up, it's too late. I am responsible for your safety and the safety of these soldiers." Su Lu walked out of the control room and took the small black box from Bai Yulan. He said without turning his head, "But someone has to be responsible for the safety of the ancient bell." The high-speed tri-wing ship needed 7 minutes to prepare for its departure. In this short period of time, the members of Team 7 knew what was happening in front of them. Shocked, their faces became incomparably grave. They quickly prepared for battle, moving several MX and one MXD mecha from the sinking ship's warehouse into the tri-winged ship. All the members walked into the ship. The last one was Su Lu, who was carrying the small black box. The information of the attack on the ancient bell is still being verified. The base has already informed the Department of National Defense. We are waiting for instructions from our superiors. The black-haired captain looked at his back and said with a hint of sadness, "It's too late. Why do you want to go and take a look?" "I won't be satisfied if I don't take a look." Su Lu pressed the button to close the cabin door. Looking at the heavy cabin door that was gradually closing, the black-haired captain shouted with a complicated expression, "I won't send a single person to you." The light tri-wing ship had a very small yield level. According to the requirements of the Bureau of Proclamation, it was specially developed to set up a net. It could accurately release the signal catcher at high speed. During the investigation of the Macklin project, Lin Banshan was able to rush from S1 to Bermuda in a very short period of time because of this modified tri-wing ship. The light gray small ship slowly separated from the huge sinking ship. The engine at the back of the ship suddenly spewed out several streams of light. The ship instantly accelerated to the maximum speed and also turned into a stream of light, disappearing into the quiet universe. Once started, the tri-wing ship entered the maximum speed. There were not many people in the federal military who knew how to operate this kind of high-speed ship, and even fewer people who could perform the fastest speed of the tri-wing ship. Lu Jiao might be able to operate this kind of ship, but he was transferred to the 17th Division after being seriously injured. At this time, he was not on the ship. The son of the governor, Da Vinci, only knew how to drive and had no knowledge of aircraft. The sinker transport ship did not provide a navigation support team to Group 7, and it did not even send a battleship auxiliary officer to them. Originally, this three-winged clipper would have turned into a rock in the universe, but fortunately, Jian Shuer had always been by Su Li's side. The national girl who studied in the Warship Command Department of the 1st Military Academy finally showed another side of her that was different from the star idol. Wearing a military uniform without epaulets, she sat quietly in the control chair and issued clear orders to control the high-speed tri-wing ship. She kept breaking speed values one after another. Su Lu glanced at her silhouette and her shoulder-length black hair before burying her head again. In the next dozens of hours, he and his team members kept silent. There seemed to be no other way to ease the tension and depression in their hearts. At some point, the tri-wing light battleship, with the secret help of the Federal Central Computer, intercepted a video signal sent by the ancient bell to S1. Everyone looked at the ghost-like fleet of the Empire in the video, and the tragic scenes of the battle, and their mood became heavier. Jian Shuer gently moved the spherical control panel with her delicate right hand, and the three-dimensional star map condensed by pure light in the cockpit slowly rotated. She simply tied her black hair behind her head and forcibly suppressed the faint sadness that she felt when watching those scenes. She continued to focus on controlling the ship. Bai Yulan and the others began to check the mecha again. They knew very well that they would not be able to rescue the ancient bell in time. The distance between the two sides was too far, and there was no hope. However, just like what the young leader thought, they wanted to verify the news with their own eyes. Su Lu squinted his eyes and looked at the three-dimensional star map ball beside Jian Shui. He suddenly turned around and walked back to his room. He said to the air in a low voice, "Find that fleet of the Empire, I don't want them to escape." According to the information and relevant calculations, that fleet should have at least 30 battleships left. Although their speed is much slower than the Tri-Wing light battleship, it is impossible for you to destroy them. A line of white words appeared in his left eye from the Federal Central Computer. Also, they are too close to the space channel. If they have the ability to come here, they must have the ability to go back at any time. It will be very difficult to catch up with them. The most important thing is that the charter network has always had gaps in the dark areas in space. The Empire's fleet should be hiding in these narrow channels. The dark areas that you can't see are the routes they took. I only need a rough estimate. Su Lu acted as if he did not hear the analysis of the central computer. He clenched his fist and said, "Find them." In the quiet black universe, there were metallic wreckages floating. In the distance, some deformed bodies of the Federation soldiers could be seen colliding with the parts of the battleship and slowly disappearing into the depths of space. After the violent explosion, the ancient bell had become countless pieces of scattered structure. The traces of burnt and melted metal on the battleship proved the tragedy of the battle a few days ago. The Tri-Wing light battleship reduced its speed for the first time. It slowly and carefully flew past the edge of the dense debris. Su Lu and the members of Group 7 who were behind the porthole were speechless when they saw this scene. The space was filled with the smell of tragedy and sadness. Hearing the curses, I can only accept it sincerely and continue to write the book diligently. I will not let down the tiger nor the bird. I will write this story well. Chapter 562. Looking at the tragic traces of the battle outside the porthole, Su Lu remained silent. His thick and straight eyebrows didn't tremble at all. Even his squinted eyes slowly relaxed. Is this what it means to be dead? That Tiger and his valiant and battle-hardened subordinates had died just like that without a sound? Mrs. Zhong was also dead? He didn't understand why the sadness in his heart had melted away so quickly. It was just like the ice and snow in the north of 5460 that had suddenly turned into streams, cutting through the thick plains. It was just like cutting through his heart one by one at this moment. It didn't hurt, but there was a feeling of emptiness, like there was a place where he couldn't grab hold of strength. They had talked on the phone once at the front line, eaten together twice, and had a deep conversation twice. If it wasn't for Madame Zhong and Little Watermelon, he wouldn't have been that familiar with this fallen commander. However, it was precisely because of this that Su Li's feelings, other than feeling frustrated and empty, felt incomparably absurd. Such a great person did not even have the time to bloom the most brilliant light in his life in the vast universe. He did not even have the time to become more familiar with him and learn more about him. How could he be dead? What do we do next? Jian Shui's eyes were slightly misty. She slightly pursed her lips and asked softly. Bai Yulan and her team members looked at Su Lu with a heavy heart. Before they set off, they had expected the tragic end of the ancient bell's destruction, but they still came because they needed confirmation. Now that they had unfortunately received confirmation, what could they do? Catch up with them. Countless warship wreckages floated outside the porthole. Su Lu looked away and repeated the words he had repeated many times to everyone. The Empire's hunting fleet had probably entered the space passage and returned to the mainland, but this did not change his decision. Even if there was only a 1 in 1,000 chance, he would still catch up with the Empire's fleet. No, even if there was no hope, there was no need to consider the effect of this light tri-winged warship catching up with the Empire's fleet. He would still stick to his decision. This was not the action of a child who had cried bitterly, but the stubbornness of a stone. At this moment, the people of the Federation were unwilling to let the Empire's fleet leave after killing Zhong Shouhu. However, this unwillingness was expressed in Su Li's eyes. The Federal Central Computer calculated backward from the space where the ancient bell was attacked and provided a possible escape route for the Empire's fleet. After Su Lu entered the data into the star map, he allowed Jian Shui to continue driving the spaceship at high speed in the uninhabited universe. He hid in the room and did not come out for a few hours. The Bureau of Proclamations tri-winged warship streaked across the quiet space like a stream of light, silently and somewhat lonely. No one had any hope of catching up to the dynasty's fleet. Therefore, when the three-winged battleship's surveillance system discovered that the silhouettes of a dark, ghostly fleet were gradually disappearing in the darkness of the universe ahead, the crew members on the battleship felt somewhat incredulous. The Empire's fleet. People shouted in the tri-winged warship. Su Lu rushed to the control room and looked at the image transmitted back from the hologram. His right hand that was hanging by his waist trembled slightly. The universe 170,000 kilometers ahead was dead silent and empty. There was nothing abnormal with the naked eye. Only the spherical star map of the battleship clearly marked that there was an extremely vast space with an area of unknown square kilometers. It was the entrance to the space passage in the central region of the Night Scorpion Nebula, and the Empire's fleet that killed the ancient bell was now slowly disappearing from that entrance. The members of Group 7 looked at the distant space image on the hologram with a serious expression. No one expected that the Empire's fleet, which should have retreated into the space passage long ago, would be so much slower than expected. We can't catch up. Jian Shuer looked at the calculation result on the hologram and said with a trembling voice. She didn't know why, but she could feel Su Li's eagerness and anger better than anyone else. She knew that he really wanted to catch up with the Empire's fleet, although she couldn't think of what he could do even if he caught up with them. Su Li's eyes narrowed again. On the transport ship and the tri-winged warship, he had heard the words, "We can't catch up with them," too many times. That feeling of emptiness and confusion was piling up in his heart. The Empire's fleet sent a communication request. Gu Shifeng took off the surveillance headset and said loudly in surprise. A man wearing the uniform of a general of the Imperium appeared on the light beam of the three-winged light warship. The muscular officer of the Imperium had many medals that represented glory on his chest. His slightly raised eyebrows did not conceal his delight and disdain at all. "It's Cal." Bai Yulan narrowed her eyes behind Su Lu and said with strong hatred and murderous intent, "The most famous butcher general of the Empire. In the last war, this person personally ordered the slaughter of 400 severely injured Federation soldiers who were unable to evacuate in time." Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the proud and complacent Empire's royal family member on the hologram. He listened to the other party babbling in a language that he didn't understand. Suddenly, he said, "Who knows the Empire's language? Translate for me." Bai Yulan hesitated for a moment and stood up. She looked at the hologram sent by the Empire's fleet and translated as calmly as possible. He said, "You guys arrived later than I thought. The Federation only had time to send you guys? I'm not interested in killing you guys because killing that commander of the West Woods felt good. I'm already full." Bai Yulan paused for a moment and continued to translate. "I'm happy to share this joy with you. If you want, I can provide you with the beautiful image of the explosion of the ancient bell." He glanced at Su Lu and said, "The rest is just him blowing his own trumpet and describing the scene of Commander Zhong's death. Translate according to his words." Su Lu slightly tilted his head and looked at the repulsive butcher general of the Empire on the hologram. There was not a trace of emotion in his eyes, as if he was looking at a dead person. "Don't leave out a single word. In the end," he said, "greetings to your president. In the future, we will often come to the Federation for holidays. Of course, you are welcome to come as well, as long as you are not afraid of death." At this moment, the people on the three-winged light warship finally understood why the Empire's fleet had not entered the portal until now. It was because the other party wanted to announce their bloody victory to the Federation. They wanted to show off their bloody smugness and show off their disdain to satisfy the twisted mentality of the County King. After the communication was cut off, the last three warships of the Imperium's fleet moved forward into the space channel silently. The picture was somewhat weird, as if three sharp and enormous black nails had pierced into an invisible membrane without causing any ripples. The Empire's fleet entered the portal and returned to their homeland. At this moment, even if the Federation sent a large number of warships over, they would not be able to launch an attack. They could only watch as the Empire's fleet left. Ever since Li Pifu assassinated the Empire's emperor in the Mecha camp, both the Federation and the Empire had extremely tight protection of their core members on the battlefield. In the past few decades, Zhong Suehu was the most important person who had fallen on the battlefield or fallen in a conspiracy. The other party's commander was the high and mighty County King of the Empire's royal family. Once the other party returned to the Empire's homeland, even if the Federation launched a large-scale attack on the Empire in the future, it would be extremely difficult to kill him on the battlefield. Once the Empire's fleet arrogantly returned to the homeland, it would be extremely likely that it would be impossible to avenge the tiger. But what could they do? They could only watch as the last shadow of the Empire's fleet gradually disappeared into space. Feudal anger, sorrow, and helplessness. A strong feeling of unwillingness pervaded the Federation's three-winged warship. There is a saying in the Federation: if a big shot wants to take revenge, it is not too late to wait 10 years, but the revenge of a small shot needs to be done from morning to night. Sulu turned around and looked at the team members sincerely. "I want to try using a speed that no one has ever thought of, using the shortest amount of time, perhaps from morning to night, to complete this task. I've written this most powerful part of the plot. I'm a bit nervous. Perhaps I'll write less tomorrow, afraid that what I write will not be as good as today's chapter. Also, this is the opening of a major plot, so I have to pay extra attention to it. I'm quite satisfied with today's chapter title and content. It's just that this small matter has a different flavor. From the point to the line, I've smoothly and reasonably connected all the aspects of the story and the incident without any omissions or abruptness. I'm very satisfied with the recent content. It's reasonable and unexpected. I hope that I can cultivate these words even better in the future." Chapter 563. Late at night, it rained in S1 Capital Special District. The pitter-patter of raindrops hit the dark green leaves, knocked on everyone's windows, and disturbed their dreams. The coming summer was drenched by the rain. Under the night sky, the soft sound of a violin came from an unknown building, quietly exuding a sense of peace. However, on the same rainy night, in the official residences that ordinary people could not come into contact with, a completely different mood and atmosphere was condensed. The President's residence, the West Mountain compound, and the top floor of Parliament Hill were all brightly lit. Government officials and military officers rushed to and fro, lowering their voices as they made phone calls in all directions. The shock and nervousness on their faces were unusually strong. An hour ago, the Federation Bureau of Investigation raised the Homeland Security alert to the highest level. The Federation officers and soldiers who were on vacation received the emergency notice and quickly gathered at the 4 military region stations. 17 space military bases, including the new moon base, entered a state of readiness. In the dark universe, the fleets of the Federation quickly advanced to the designated star regions to set up defenses. The atmosphere at the Bureau of Proclamation, at the end of the dead-end road on the outskirts of the capital's special district, also became unusually tense at the moment. Director Tai rushed back from home with a cold expression. The ordinary people of the Federation did not know what had happened, nor did they know that for these departments, this rainy night was not fresh, but heavy and long-suffering. When the information was finally confirmed, this tense and oppressive atmosphere that pervaded the various departments suddenly turned into shock and pain. Lieutenant General Zhong Shouhu, commander of the 4th Military Region of the Federation and commander-in-chief of the West Woods Front Line, was attacked and killed in the Night Scorpion Nebula. The light penetrated the huge floor-to-ceiling windows of the president's residence, illuminating the rain outside the building like a silver line. The Special Task Force agents in black formal suits looked around with serious expressions like hawks. They only knew that something big had happened in the Federation, but they did not know what it was. At this moment, the staff in the official residence could no longer be like those familiar nights, drinking coffee to eliminate the tiredness after busy overtime work. Men and women gathered together to tease a few words. Sometimes when they met His Excellency the President, they could even joke with him a few words. They quietly and nervously stayed in their respective offices, waiting for the work that was about to come. On this rainy night, Mr. President would not be in the mood to drink coffee with everyone, and neither would they. In the Oval Office, a loud curse and the sound of a heavy object crashing could be heard. "Who can tell me what the F***ck is going on?" After confirming that Zhong Shouhu had been killed, President Pabre could no longer maintain his usual demeanor. Like a lion that had been stabbed, he roared furiously at his subordinates in the room. His tanned face grew darker and darker, and his thick lips cursed without hesitation. 3 buttons of his shirt had already been undone, but it still couldn't cool down his angry heart. No one answered the president's angry question because no one, including the president, could have predicted such a tragedy, not even considering the possibility of the Empire's fleet sneaking into the Federation's territory to carry out a sneak attack. Director Pai, who had just rushed over from the Bureau of Proclamation, remained silent. The Federation's charter network should bear the greatest responsibility for this incident, but the big shots in the room all knew that the Federation's resources could support the Bureau of Proclamation's comprehensive surveillance of human society, but for the vast universe, the glory of the Charter, which was known to cover the universe, had always had loopholes. The most pressing question in front of the Federation government at this moment was the most direct reason for the fall of the Westwood Star. How could the Empire's fleet pass through the space passage in the Night Scorpion Nebula? There was dead silence in the Oval Office. President Pabre frowned, pursed his thick lips, and pounded the table twice as if venting. Then, he looked back at the oil painting on the wall and fell into silence. The question now is the Empire going to start the attack? The president recovered a trace of calmness, slowly buttoned his shirt, and asked in a slightly hoarse voice. "The troops are gathering and will be done in 48 hours. The chairman of the Federation's Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Myers, looked a little tired at this moment. He replied in a deep voice, "The subsidiary fleet of the space base has already taken off and is rushing toward the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor. How long will it take for the second fleet to return to its own defense zone?" President Pabre did not turn his head. He put his hands on his aching waist and asked softly. At this moment, no one knew if he had some regrets in his heart. If he had not transferred the Federation's main fleet to the desolate star field outside the West Woods in order to annihilate the Empire's expeditionary fleet, would the ancient bell be able to escape this disaster? The Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Fleet, General Hong Yuliang, appeared on the remote communications screen. The sadness and self-blame on the face of the female general, who was close to 50 years old, was immediately transformed into calmness and determination by her strong military will. Mr. President, the Federal Fleet will completely strengthen its defense zone after the 78 Federation standard hours. We are ready to face the entire fleet of the Empire. She looked down at the analysis report just sent by the staff officer and continued, according to the precious information that Commander Zhong ordered the ancient bell to send back before his death and his own judgment. The Federal Fleet Staff Headquarters has come to the conclusion that the Empire has not completely mastered the warp-space warp-jump method. It is only a limited control. They can only send a batch of intermediate fleets over at most, and probably because they are waiting for the space storm to subside, the interval between the teleportation should be more than 7 days. Hearing the military's analysis, the heavy stone in President Pabre's heart was slightly relieved. He then asked in a serious tone, "This judgment will directly affect the government's next response strategy. It concerns the safety of the Federation. Are you confident?" "Yes." General Hong Yuliang thought for a moment and replied, "This is just a sinister sneak attack by the Empire. It is not the precursor of a big attack. I support the judgment of the fleet." General Myers tiredly added, "If the Empire has completely mastered the space warp technology, according to the cruel and gambling personality of the Emperor, he will definitely mobilize all the fleets at once and put the most precious first opportunity of a sneak attack on S1. The Oval Office was silent again. President Pabre turned around and looked at the important cabinet members of the Federation government and said, "The government's priority now is to stabilize the situation in the West Woods." The tiger in the West Woods had died. How would his brave soldiers and the ordinary people of the West Woods, who loved and respected the Zhong family, react? Hold a press conference in the early morning. I am here to announce this sad news to the people of the Federation, especially the people of the West Woods. The president took a deep breath, and a trace of indomitable perseverance flashed across his tanned face. He pressed his hands on the desk, leaned forward slightly, and said in a serious tone, "No matter how despicable the Empire's actions are, they can't disrupt the pace of the Federation. They can't stop us. On the contrary, they will only encourage us. I order that the President's special fund within 3 years will be advanced to the construction and improvement of the forward base. The Department of Defense must come up with a final plan within a month. The production of the forward base and the supporting companies must be accelerated. No one can delay this matter with any excuse. Otherwise, I will ask them to be court-martialed." President Pabre looked at the people in the Oval Office and said, "We have declared war on the Empire. Then let the flames of war burn on their land earlier. I unconditionally support the President's instructions." On the remote screen, Vice President Byron of the Federation was the first to stand up and express his support. He said in a serious tone, "Tomorrow, I will call for an emergency meeting of the Federation Parliament and propose to pass the secondary military control." A black round-backed chair and a black ridiculous round hat were on the head of the old man from Liyuan Palace. This old man was the true financial oligarch of the Federation. Because in the financial world of the Federation, there would always be only one leader or master, the iron calculator. The object of their resistance would always be the Federation government and the president, who had the highest authority in the official residence. As the head of one of the 7 major families, whose every pore flowed with the cold smell of money and numbers, Liyuan Palace was rarely moved by anything these years. Even on the day when the Federation government, in order to attack the Li family, forcibly passed the financial integration law on Parliament Hill, the wrinkles on his face were still as if he was sleeping. However, today, the wrinkles on his face began to pile up like the yellow soil washed by the river, piling up with complicated and sentimental thoughts. Thinking of the phone call he had with several old friends, the old man from Liyuan Palace said to himself with complicated emotions, "The sky is going to rain, and the Federation is going to war. No one can stop it. Only, Tiger, you left so suddenly. I'm afraid such a big family business will be a problem." The back of the mountain. Lady Tai stopped chopping onions and took off her goggles. Her mood had been a bit uneasy today. It was unknown whether it was because of the onions or because of the news, but there was a faint sentimental look in her eyes. It has been confirmed that the news is true. The thin Tai Xuan stood in the drizzling night wind on the lakeside terrace. He looked at his mother with a lonely expression and said, "Please investigate this matter. I always feel that it's not that simple. Also, no matter who the Federation chooses to take over the position of Tiger's frontline commander-in-chief, I have to make a trip to the West Woods. Level 2 military control? I wonder if the Parliament can pass it." Du Shaoqing hung up the phone call that Big Shot had just called. Then, he sat in the shadows by the window of his apartment. He looked at the drizzle outside through the curtains and was silent for a long time. His lifelong enemy had died under the artillery fire of the Imperial fleet. This famous general of the Federation should feel lucky, relieved, or strongly unwilling. However, none of these emotions appeared in his heart. On the contrary, some kind of complicated emotions that could not be suppressed gradually appeared on his gloomy and cold face like an iceberg. Du Shaoqing's eyebrows twitched slightly. It seemed that he was about to cry, but in the end, he did not. After a long silence, he opened the drawer beside him and took out a very rare old-style photo. This was a group photo taken many years ago when 5 youths were in the prime of their lives at the first military academy. In the slightly curled photo, there were 2 beautiful girls squatting in the front row. On the left, Chao Jiaran was now the wife of Prime Minister Nan. On the right, she was Zhong Shouhu's wife. In the back row were 3 young officers. Standing in the middle was Zhong Shouhu, whose face was slightly chubby and full of youthfulness. Fatty Tian was still a thin bamboo pole. He was standing happily on one side, while the cold Zhong Shouhu was standing on the other side, bored. Du Shaoqing looked at the photo and thought of many things in the past. His finger gently slid across the photo and the girl's face, as if he was gently caressing her who had disappeared into the universe. Then, an uncontrollable anger flashed in his cold eyes. Chapter 564. Empire, Tianjing Planet. The Supreme Emperor of the Left Sky Star region had left the lofty Zhaixing Tower today. Instead, he was strolling in the royal palace that was sheltered by green trees. He carried a small green pot in his right hand, and his long black hair with silver strands draped over his shoulders. Like a poet, he walked back and forth in the royal palace. There was a faintly discernible, strange, and yet delightful smile on his face. The tiger that had blocked his path in the West Woods for many years was finally dead. He didn't have the emptiness that a poet would have when an enemy passed away. He only had the satisfaction of drinking good wine. However, unlike the carnival atmosphere in the building of the military headquarters, the emperor controlled his emotions well. He drank slowly but didn't smile wildly. This was because he had absolute confidence in this transmigration hunting plan. The subjects of the Empire had spent decades to complete the 3 important research results. This time, all of them had been invested into the plan to kill Zhong Shouhu. They had even replaced his original plan to capture and kill the Federation's young girls. How could they fail? However, the Emperor had a somewhat different opinion regarding the source of the information regarding this hunting plan. In his opinion, it would be very difficult for the last hero to achieve this. Perhaps some interesting changes were taking place within the Federation, but such changes were something that the Empire was very happy to see. It was just a pity that the hero with the royal bloodline would soon become a sacrifice. The palace servants followed behind him from afar. They knew that the Emperor was in a good mood, and their faces were full of smiles. Military Affairs Minister Prince Bo Wu was closer to the Emperor. After hearing the cold voice of the Emperor, his eyes couldn't help but flicker slightly. Actually, I know that the military headquarters made this plan just to appease my anger and to appease the negative impact of the expeditionary army's destruction on the empire." The emperor said mockingly, "Even you, the Minister of Military Affairs, are probably laughing at me in your heart. Laughing at your subordinates for throwing all of the empire's greatest secrets into petty assassinations instead of exchanging them for the greatest benefit." "I don't dare." Prince Bo Wu lowered his body in fear. "It's just the two of us now. Don't say these useless words." The emperor said lightly, "I just want to let other people, or at least you, know why I want to kill Zhong Shouhu. Because I want to force the Federation to attack earlier." Prince Bai Wu slowly straightened his body and remained silent, but a trace of coldness flashed in his heart. "The expeditionary army has been wiped out. The warmongering president will definitely try his best to push the Federation to attack the Imperium. It's only a matter of time." The Empire's emperor said slowly, "And with the resources our empire possesses, not only is it insufficient to support a full-scale attack against the Federation, it is even extremely difficult to deal with their attacks. Attacking when the Federation is not ready is always easier to deal with than when they are ready." The emperor looked down at the calm surface of the returning pond and said, "Give them all of the Empire's empty borderlands. When the Federation occupies a star system, they have to leave behind troops and resources to defend it. The more star systems the Federation occupies, the thinner the resources and troops will be, and the more difficult it will be. Plus, these people are used to doing shameless things in the name of freedom. Since they have been using this name, they will naturally feel embarrassed to kill too many people. The civilians in Star County need to be managed and fed. If too many people starve to death, that poor president won't look too good. The deeper the Federation goes, the more complete their failure will be. Hypocrisy will be their final epitaph." Prince Bai Wu thought with a trace of shock. Since the end of the war more than 10 years ago, the emperor in front of him had forcefully changed the strategic arrangement of the empire and strengthened the expeditionary army to put pressure on the Federation. However, he also took back the most elite army from the edge of the space tunnel. Turned out that all of these arrangements had a deeper meaning. Today is a very memorable day. The emperor turned around, looked at Prince Bai Wu, and said lightly, "Let's go to the mausoleum. It's the anniversary of the assassination of my father and teacher. I want to tell them this news that is neither good nor bad." The relevant conversation took place in the Federation President's mansion and the Empire's palace. The two major forces in the universe were both making large-scale strategic arrangements. The death of that Shilin tiger was admittedly a world-shaking event, and it could also become the opening song of a great era. However, at this moment, people would mourn or celebrate, but they didn't have time to think about vengeance or things to prevent vengeance. The remnants of the Empire's ghost fleet that carried out the hunting plan had already entered the space tunnel and were about to arrive at the Empire's territory. Under such circumstances, no one, including Emperor Huai Fuchai and Federation President Pabre, would expect that there was a small battleship and a person in the universe who was planning something crazy but exceptionally calm. We don't have the data of the space tunnel of the Night Scorpion Nebula. This data is the top-secret information of the Bureau of Proclamation. The upper echelons of the government will definitely not allow you to do such a crazy suicidal action. Naturally, they won't give you the data. Jian Shuai looked at Su Lu and said seriously, "I can't explain too much, but I do." Su Lu lowered his head slightly and said softly, "The Empire was able to successfully attack the ancient bell because no one in the Federation thought that they had the ability to send a fleet over. Similarly, no one in that fleet thought that we would go over like a bunch of idiots and carry out a counterattack. The enemy has at least 30 battleships, and we only have one light battleship. No matter how you look at it, this is suicide." Lan Xiaolong, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, "Boss, I'm not afraid of death. I just feel that it's not worth it to commit suicide like this. If we want to avenge Commander Zhong, we should first live well and then find our revenge on the battlefield. Su Lu didn't explain too much. He smiled and looked up. I've come up with a plan. The success rate is very high, at least 30%. The team members were silent. When did you come up with a plan? However, after a moment of silence, Xiong Linquan's rough voice rang out. 30% we can try. Then let's do it. Let's do it, Gu Shifeng said. Do it. Da Vinci's face was slightly pale, but he still gritted his teeth and roared. Bai Yulan stood quietly at the side and didn't speak. The rest of the team members didn't speak either. However, their body movements showed the attitude of this small group. The most valiant counterattack against the shameless sneak attack of the Imperium was something that every soldier of the Federation was willing to try. In particular, the behavior of the Butcher General of the Imperium before he left had already hurt their self-esteem. How could they allow these people to kill the Federation military's commander and then leave safely? All right. Jian Shuier sighed softly. She lifted the black hair beside her ear and tied it into a ponytail. A smile flashed across her beautiful face. Then let's hurry up and get ready. But I'm very curious. What's the arrangement for the part of your plan to come back? Of course we'll take a ship back. Su Li's answer was extremely natural and concise. He smiled and said, Of course we should first go to the computing room to perfect this plan. Can you go? Of course I can. Unless you want to go to Tianjing and peek at the Empire's princess bathing, I really can't do that. However, I must remind you that I'm basically in a state of hibernation over there. Furthermore, my power is very weak. If you go too far into the Empire's territory, I may lose contact with you at any time. It's fine. I only need to go a short distance, kill that duke, and come back. If I really want to go deep into the Empire's territory, I'll probably be dead by then. In the room, the members of Teams 7 and Jian Shuier were quickly drafting a surprise attack plan on the screen on the table. What they needed the most now was, of course, the data of the spatial channel that Su Lu had promised. However, Su Lu didn't enter the room at this time. Instead, he stood outside the door with his head lowered and spoke to the Federal Central Computer in his mind. Although he had thought for a long time that since the Federation controlled the spatial channel and had attacked the Empire's territory many times, they must have hidden some means in the Empire's star field, such as a signal interruption station in a state of dead silence, or a certain scale on the antenna of the charter network. Su Lu was truly relieved now that he had obtained the personal confirmation of the charter network. There are indeed many satellite propulsion devices used by the Bureau of Proclamation to set up the network on the ship. The problem is that there's no way to install them on all the mechas. If the surprise attack on the enemy's flagship succeeds, how are we going to return to the ship? A tactical expert of Team 7 frowned as he looked at the drafted plan on the screen on the table, and said in confusion. Everyone in the room raised their heads at the same time and looked at Su Lu outside the door in confusion. If it's just one mecha, that's enough, Su Lu said silently in his mind. Then, he ordered the charter network to close the door. After a smooth sound, the high-strength isolation visual door quickly closed, separating Su Lu outside the door and the people inside the door into two different worlds. The team members in the cabin were stunned for a moment, but they immediately reacted. Expressions of disbelief and panic appeared on their faces as they rushed for the door. They knew Su Li's personality, so no one shouted or tried to persuade Su Lu to do something stupid. Instead, they directly tried to open the cabin door. Gu Shifeng quickly opened the workbench and crouched on the ground to connect to the spaceship's system. Her 10 somewhat clumsy fingers operated at a speed that had never been seen before. Xiong Linquan even impulsively picked up the heavy Darlin's autocannon beside him, wanting to blast the cabin door open. Fortunately, Lan Xiaolong beside him held him tightly. Bai Yulan did not move. She only raised her head and glared at Su Lu through the 3 transparent barriers. She, who was usually submissive, had a dark and angry expression on her face at this moment. Jian Shuer stared blankly at Su Lu outside the door. She clenched her fists tightly, and tears silently flowed down her cheeks. The story should not have developed like this. The black-haired her, the brave and skilled member of Team 7, should have set off together with the small-eyed man outside the door and fought together. She should not have just watched him leave alone. If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have thought that the Bureau of Proclamation's spaceship's escape pod design would be so interesting, Su Lu said to the charter network. Looking at the actions of the people inside the door, he felt warmth in his heart. According to my calculations, your chances of survival are indeed not very high. So, if you want to cry, just cry. Don't tell such unfunny jokes. Su Lu smiled. He thought to himself that a boring creature like a hero could easily become a dead man, so it was better to leave this kind of opportunity to the bored him. He was still used to fighting alone. That way, even if he died, only one person would die. Then, he gently patted the cabin door and said goodbye to his companions on the other side of the door. Accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of air jets, the 3-winged light spaceship's escape pod was released. Those familiar and kind faces slowly faded away. At this time, the charter network reported, the secret line to the president's residence has been connected. Su Lu picked up the phone and said, "This is Su Lu. I'm at the entrance to the Night Scorpion Nebula. This is Pabre. Please speak." The president's unexpected and quick answer came from the other end of the phone. The Empire still has a seed in the Federation. He should be at. Su Lu gave an address and then continued. It was the assistant director of the Bureau of Proclamation, Cui Zhedong, who terminated the purge investigation during the project. President Pabre was silent for a moment. He was obviously shocked by this news again. Then, he reacted and asked in a deep voice, "What do you want to do?" Su Lu did not answer and directly hung up the phone. Then, he walked back to the 3-winged light spaceship's control room and sat on the central control chair. He said to the air, "Let's go. Actually, I can send the data and operation manual of the space channel directly into your brain. Then, you can personally pilot it. You should know that I am strictly forbidden from directly performing physical operations. This is the basic law of the first charter. Even if you have the first sequence authority, you can't change it. Back in 5460, you directly operated a mecha to send me off. After that, you did the same thing. In fact, you've already violated the first charter many times. And in my opinion, this has nothing to do with my authority. It's purely because you like this kind of fun." Su Lu no longer paid any attention to the silent central computer. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the quiet universe outside the porthole. He said, "Sorry to trouble you. I want to go over there." Chapter 565. In the dark universe, there were still particles ejected by the engines of the remnants of the Empire's fleet ahead. The light in the empty space was somewhat dim. A strange spatial fluctuation that could be vaguely captured by the naked eye occurred. A metallic gray tri-winged ship, like a nocturnal expert that could not speak and silently hunted down injured beasts, silently entered this space and followed the fleet ahead. In the lower level of the tri-winged ship, Su Lu carefully dismantled the Bureau of Proclamation's small satellite propulsion device on the ship and then installed it on his own mech. Occasionally, he would glance at the unfamiliar space on the screen, then he lowered his head and remained silent. There was a proverb in the Federation that said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Right now, he and this dark tri-winged ship were sailing above the sun, among the dim light of countless distant stars, but he also felt that the space of the Empire was just like the space of the Federation. There was nothing too strange about it. Before the Empire's fleet entered the space channel, Duke Coton's arrogant and cruel final declaration allowed the Federal Central Computer to obtain and deconstruct the electronic signature of the ship he was on. In the risky plan that Su Lu and the Central Computer discussed, the tri-winged ship would follow the Empire's fleet from afar and try to find an opportunity to launch a surprise attack on the flagship before the enemy entered the Empire's border space defense line. If the sneak attack succeeded, Su Lu would have to activate the jet propulsion device that was currently installed on the MXD mech immediately. The tri-winged ship would be directly controlled by the central computer to follow at high speed and accurately perform a high-speed dive to support him when he left the ship again. This was a crazy and risky plan. The most difficult part of the plan was how to ensure the connection between the central computer's tentacles and the S-1 main body after entering the Empire without directly dissipating into countless electronic particles due to the lack of a signal relay station. The craziest part was the evacuation after the successful sneak attack. The tri-winged ship had to maintain an extremely high cruising speed to pick up the MXD that was ejected into space before the Empire's fleet could react. This kind of difficulty was like throwing a pebble from a green hill at a high-speed train that was whizzing past by a naughty child. The pebble had to pass through the window that had just been opened, and in the end, it had to fall into the teacup in front of the passenger, creating a few dark brown splashes. The paper cup did not fall, and the pebble did not shatter. According to the calculations of Charter's computer, the Empire's ghost fleet in front of them had forcefully passed through the space channel twice and suffered a strong counterattack in the process of ambushing the ancient bell. The battleship had suffered great losses, especially since the Empire's electronic system was already behind that of the Federation. It should be riddled with holes from the space storm and lose a lot of long-range surveillance capabilities. Under such circumstances, even if the other side still had more than 20 warships and more than 10,000 combat troops surrounding them, with Su Li's terrifying mecha piloting ability and the Charter computer's even more terrifying computing power, it was still possible for them to launch a surprise attack on the other side's flagship and kill that General Butcher. But what about after that? The naughty child on the green hill would start throwing pebbles. Would the passengers drinking tea on the high-speed train be frightened? Other than the white-haired conductor, the most important factor was probably luck. In the cold and cruel space battlefield, any plan that required luck was usually a suicidal plan that only focused on moving forward and not thinking about the consequences. People in their right mind would never make such a crazy and risky decision, but Su Lu had made the decision. Because at this moment, he was the young engineer in the hotel in Hong Kong after the terrorist attack on the peace concert in the Four States. He was filled with the unique anger of a young man. Donglin's orphan was very strong, but he had no family since he was young. The uncle died selfishly. Group 7 was indeed like a big family, but he had to play the role of a young parent. He would also get tired. There was never a solid wall behind him or a warm kitchen steam to lean on or warm up. In the fast food restaurant in Shisha State, he found a trace of that feeling. He was not familiar with that man, but he really had that feeling. In the end, that man died. That feeling did not have time to become a normal enjoyment. It became an extravagant hope. There was also that Shilin military windbreaker in the wind and snow outside the airport when he had just arrived at S1. That lady whom he had not met many times, but who was as gentle as a sister. Until now, he still remembered that he had once called her sister. In the Lufeng Slope clubhouse, under those oil paintings, he had once seriously told this graceful and noble lady that he owed the Zhong family of West Woods. In the night phone call a few days ago, he had promised little Watermelon that her parents would be back soon. Sadness, anger, the desire for revenge, and the promise, all of these reasons came down to the initial consideration. In the end, it all came down to one's temperament. As a person who saw injustice on the road, he wanted to kick a couple of times to prevent tripping over children passing by. When faced with such a big emotional impact, he was furious and depressed. If that imperial royal county king did not die, Su Li's life would not be happy. Therefore, he quickly decided to launch a revenge war against the imperial fleet alone and seize every moment. The space defense density of the Empire's border is completely out of my expectations. I have been remotely tracking the fleet for 40 minutes, but I have not seen any Imperial fleet or even any surveillance satellites of the Empire. I don't know why. Maybe it is because the Imperial fleet's mission to attack the ancient bell is too important, so it has been carried out secretly. But since it has succeeded, there should be no need to keep it a secret. Why is there no reaction from the mineral star that we just passed? The MXT mecha, disguised as a black, dazzling light, was already ready. Su Lu, whose skin was wrapped in the simulation system, sat silently in the dreary cockpit. As he slowly regulated his breathing, he spoke softly to the system. It didn't seem like he was asking the charter computer, but more like he was recording the last mission of his life. Because of the undercover, after the last war, I have not investigated the Empire's movements for many years, so I can't answer. Also, a final warning. The range of my perception is limited to the very narrow space outside the Empire's border. If you insist on using only the minimum number of signal interruption stations, I may lose contact with you at any time. Su Lu used silence to express his attitude. In order to complete this whimsical and crazy revenge, he needed the help of the Federal Central Computer. However, he also knew that the Federation had attacked the Empire several times and spent a lot of money to hide the signal relay stations in the Empire's space. It was a foreshadowing for the next universe war. These extremely precious resources could not be exposed too much in advance because of his personal actions. The 11th hidden node has been activated. The Federation's central computer displayed in his eyes. 380,000 kilometers in front of the tri-winged spaceship, in the annular meteorite belt around a planet, a meteorite suddenly trembled slightly. Under the disguise of the sturdy rock, the signal relay circuit that had been sleeping for more than a decade or even decades started to operate. It began to greedily extract all the non-cosmic background radio waves around it, including the Empire's fleet that had just passed by not far ahead. All the information was converted into encrypted data through the hidden nodes that the Federation's Bureau of Proclamation had spread in the Empire's universe back then and continuously transmitted to the signal relay station behind it. In the few hours before it was activated, many similar situations occurred in the Empire's border space. The metal wreckage and meteorite fragments that had been floating in the universe for a long time received a long-awaited activation command and began to perform the work of the Charter Network signal relay station. The images and signal monitoring data in this part of the universe continuously passed through the space channel and entered the Night Scorpion Nebula in the Federation's territory, as well as the ghost-like tri-winged spaceship. The distance from the exit of the space channel to the edge of the planetary system was not long. The Empire's fleet at the front was celebrating enthusiastically, but they did not expect at all that a light high-speed spaceship of the Federation had begun to play the role of a ghost that they had played a few days ago. It followed them quietly from afar like a venomous snake that could launch a critical strike at any moment. The Empire's fleet precisely adjusted the direction of their voyage with the help of the giant planet's gravity and continued to sail silently and easily in the deep darkness behind the giant planet. Because of the strategic changes made by the Empire in the past few years, there were naturally no troops of the Empire stationed in this solar system without any resources. Even the military detectors were few and far between. Therefore, anyone in this fleet discovered that the metallic gray tri-winged spaceship of the Federation had accelerated to the intersection of darkness and light at the edge of the giant planet at some point earlier under the cover of the giant planet's vast area and began to prepare for an attack. If I die in the enemy's warship, then I don't need to say anything. But if I really succeed, You must catch me when I'm ejected, or I'll fall to my death. Sulu looked at the ultra-thin display screen in front of him. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his eyes were extremely bright. He said to his only companion at the moment, "In the gravity-free environment of space, you won't fall to your death. I'd rather fall to my death than become a target floating in front of these dozens of warships, or become a piece of trash floating in space forever." The lower-level release gate of the Federation's tri-winged spaceship slowly opened. However, what came out was not those metal ball-like node signal relay stations, but a dazzling black military mecha. With a loud boom, the body of the tri-winged spaceship shook violently. The powerful ship's ejection device fiercely ejected the black MXD as if it was a stone thrown out with force. The electronic shield is so beautifully made. In the dim cockpit, Sulu, under the protection of the circulatory life support system, did not feel the cold and horror of the universe outside the cockpit. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the ultra-thin display screen, looking at the image of the giant planet's horizon not far away. He confirmed that the Empire's fleet had not discovered his arrival until now. The commander of the Empire's fleet, in order not to let the blazing light of the star disturb the carnival inside the ship, chose to pass through the back of the giant planet. The 4 warships at the front had already entered the dazzling light, and the flagship with the exotic beast engraved on its bow was now slowly moving out. The ghost-like black mecha silently but at an extremely high speed pounced in that direction. The surrounding universe was quiet and vast, with countless beautiful stars, but in Su Li's eyes, there was only this ship. Chapter 566. Keaton was the most famous county king in the Empire. Because he had the closest blood relationship with the great emperor, he was able to snatch the most beautiful women around him. The citizens of the county star under his rule had the worst life. His fierce face was the ugliest, especially when he smiled. For example, right now, he was holding a glass of wine. His face was red from drunkenness, and his fish eyes were full of excitement. His fingers were deep in the chubby cheeks of his blonde secretary. His smile was so smug and cruel. In order to celebrate His Majesty's great victory, should I find a few more virgins after the celebration? He drank a mouthful of blood-like red wine and planned the rest of the trip with satisfaction. The woman in his arms had a mesmerizing figure and blonde hair. Unfortunately, the color of her eyes was too light. As a pure-blooded member of the Empire's royal family, he was proud of his dark and ugly eyes. Of course, he was not happy about this. Every time this county king led an army, it was always a cruel slaughter and a journey full of obscene activities. However, this time, the interdimensional hunting plan was extremely important, so he had to put in all his effort and be very careful. Not to mention, there was still that little ancestor on the ship. The nobles of Tianjing Planet and the officials of the County Star were afraid of his rudeness and prominent status, but in reality, they looked down on him. However, this person used his brutality to wipe out the rebellions of the common people for His Majesty again and again. He also gained His Majesty's trust with his straightforward and violent temper. No one dared to show this emotion on the surface. County King Carlton was very clear about the views of the entire Empire's upper class. He knew that countless people hated this ugly and evil mask on his face. Although this mask was not something he wanted to wear, he didn't mind because His Majesty needed him to wear it, the Empire needed him to wear it, and his power and status also needed him to wear it. He had worn it for too long and was addicted to it. Gradually, he was very happy wearing it and forgot that the brutality was a mask given by His Majesty or his own nature. Many years ago, when he left Tianjing Planet for the first time and took the warship to a remote star region to suppress the rebellion, he gradually liked this feeling. He liked to watch those unsatisfied lowlifes tremble in front of the Empire's armored troops with crude self-made weapons, their faces pale, their feces flowing, and they scattered like a bunch of animals. Among the similar beautiful memories, there was also that year, those federal prisoners, those fat maggots that kept wriggling on the wounds of the foreigners, the painful howls of the foreigners until they groaned softly, and in the end, they died silently like garbage. But from now on, there was probably nothing else that could make him tremble with excitement and enjoy the supreme climax of his spirit than the scene of the ancient clock ship's explosion a few days ago. I don't want to be recorded in the history of the Empire. I just hope that my position in His Majesty's heart will be more stable, and I will be able to allocate more resources to my army. Keaton thought with satisfaction. He laughed and squeezed the woman's buttocks. He seemed to see a beautiful scene in front of him. A short and sharp cry rang out. It was not the female civil official, whose buttocks were bruised and swollen, that cried out in pain, but the warship's central control system automatically sent out an alarm. The Imperial soldiers in the central control room of the warship looked at each other in surprise. The officer in charge of the electronic monitoring shook his head in confusion. There was an alarm, but the data filtering program of the warship's monitoring system did not indicate the source of the alarm. Because of this reason, like most of his subordinates, Keaton did not raise his vigilance enough. Except for official military exercises, the Empire's fleet in the local star region had not sent out an alarm for more than 10 years. Could it be that some stupid electronic technician accidentally touched some device? However, only 10 seconds later, the short and sharp alarm rang again. This time, the warship system indicated the source of the danger. The cold mechanical voice echoed in the room. Unknown target is approaching at high speed, distance 2,322 kilometers, direction deviation 83 degrees. Keaton's face slightly darkened. He frowned and looked at his subordinate, who finally woke up and started to quickly analyze the alarm. The captain wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and ran over, nervously reporting, "The unknown flying object is very small. Because it is in the background of the bright star, we can't confirm its shape yet. But its shape is obviously irregular, so it should be a small meteorite. Please don't worry, the warship has started to adjust its posture, and the relevant reinforcement plates have been covered." As if mocking the intelligence and calculation ability of the carbon-based life in the warship, 3 seconds later, the central control computer of the warship sent out a sharp alarm again. Target distance 779 kilometers, speed, warning, impact warning, warning, impact warning, please return to your seats and stabilize your body. 1 second later, the content of the central control computer of the warship became, target distance 277 kilometers, speed. Hearing this, Keaton, who had a disgusted but relaxed expression, suddenly stood up and stared at the light beam with his gloomy eyes. He did not know if there was a small meteorite in space that had such a shocking speed, but he was absolutely sure that even if there was such a small meteorites would not slow down. However, with a gloomy expression, he did not have time to say anything. The alarm of the central control system of the warship could not even keep up with the speed of the meteorite. After a muffled sound, the floor of the warship that was sailing smoothly slightly trembled, as if it was hit by a small object. Everyone subconsciously looked up and followed the surveillance camera of the warship in confusion and shock, looking at the location of the impact. With one look, many of the officers of Dynasty could not help but let out a gasp, because they saw in the vast image of space, on the lonely outer shell of the warship, a Black Federation new model mechanical suit appeared. The surroundings were dead silent, but the unpleasant sound of metal colliding was still echoing in the cockpit. The MXD smashed into the upper hull of the Dynasty's battleship like a meteor. Although it was forced to decelerate in the last 1,000 kilometers with the help of the propulsion system, such a violent collision would still mercilessly take away the pilot's life. However, the muscle fibers and bone joints in Su Li's body, along with the mysterious cultivation method taught by the uncle and his incomparably diligent training, had become incomparably tough, and had actually withstood the terrifying instantaneous time that was instantly overloaded by 30 times. Uncle George Carlin had once said, "The human body is the #1 machine." Then today, Su Li's body was undoubtedly on the path to becoming a powerful metal machine. With a slight ringing in his ears, he did not have the time to admire the Federal Central Computer's orbit calculation ability, nor did he pay attention to the vacuum outside the cockpit that was still extremely cold even under the blazing light of the stars. He only typed in an operation command as fast as he could. Shang Qiu and the Nutshell Engineering Department had specially designed the MXD mechanical suit, which still retained some of the weird design of the little white flower years ago. Following Su Li's input, the super alloy plate on the left chest of the MXD mechanical suit suddenly opened, and a mechanical repair arm that glowed with a metallic light quickly extended out. The tool at the front of the slender mechanical repair arm was like a human's finger. The moment it came into contact with a certain metal part of the outer hull of the Imperial warship, it began to hum and rotate rapidly. The weak electric sparks produced by the forceful connection of countless circuits flashed in the vacuum. Without the support of the main cannons, it would be extremely difficult for that lone black MXD mecha to forcefully blast through the super-thick alloy shield of the Imperial battleship in the middle of the vast universe. Furthermore, this specially made MXD mecha had already been stripped of most long-range heavy firepower weapons in order to maximize Su Li's control advantage. Therefore, he did not plan to blast a large hole in this Imperial warship before crawling in. Instead, he planned to use tools to open this warship from the front, just like a thief trying to pick a lock. Only this thief, the Black MXD, had already exposed himself. The blueprints and related data of the Imperial battleship previously entered by the Federation's central mainframe flipped through rapidly in Su Li's mind. He needed to kill his way in before the Imperial battleship could react. Otherwise, those terrifying battleships that were still charging around his mecha would cross fire on their own, directly blasting him and his mecha into smithereens or sinking them into the darkness of space. The Black MXD was like a gecko, sticking closely to the terrifyingly wide hull of the target warship. Sparks flew everywhere, and it only existed in the vacuum for an extremely short period of time before silently disappearing. 3 seconds. In just 3 short seconds, 3 seconds that left all the Imperial soldiers on the warship dumbfounded and speechless, the Black MXD successfully non-violently removed the thick alloy plate. Amidst the heroic atmosphere of the murderous atmosphere around him, the Black MXD dashed in a flash. "I'll kill him." As the Black MXD entered the Imperial warship at high speed, Su Li spoke very seriously into the communication system. Data and annotations from the central computer of the Federation flashed in his pure black left pupil now and then. Following the data and annotations, Su Li maneuvered the mecha forward at a high speed and found an inconspicuous cover of the connection assembly. After breaking it open, he cut off the preliminary surveillance sensors in the relevant areas of the Imperium's warship. The Federal Central Computer had been researching the Imperial warship for almost 100 years and had collected a huge amount of data. Furthermore, it had supercomputing power that the Imperial people were envious of and terrified of. Therefore, even though the warships of the Imperial Ghost Fleet were specially modified to withstand the storm in the space passage and to hunt down the ancient bell, he could still accurately guess the design ideas of the Imperial Academy of Science. From there, he could provide specific data and suggestions for Su Li to launch a surprise attack. Under the guidance of the Federal Central Computer's supercomputing power, Su Li's mechanical engineering talent was also displayed to its fullest. The tall and heavy Black MXD nimbly dodged around the Imperial warship and found a second position. It quickly dug open an alloy valve, and with a flick of its mechanical arm, it accurately installed a device. Every movement was so concise and beautiful, it was like an enlarged version of when he was focused on mechanical engineering. From the time he broke into the warship until now, the second hand of the Universal Standard Clock had moved 17 times. The internal defense system of the Imperial warship had been fully activated, but not a single Imperial soldier could stop him, and not a single Imperial mech could surround him crazily. Chapter 567. Under the effect of the pressure difference, the air in the upper layer of the Empire's battleship was ejected out of the ship at high speed. The roaring wind cut through the cockpit and then disappeared. In the next moment, the black MXD also turned into a violent wind in the upper layer of the battleship. The heavy and enormous alloy body suddenly moved, easily avoiding the restraining belts that popped out from the internal partition of the battleship. Pulling out a high-speed afterimage, it passed through the long covered bridge and rushed towards the dim patio passageway. Then, it jumped down from the platform that was more than 10 meters below the entrance of the passageway. The jump was so clean and neat, without any hesitation. Looking at the Federation mecha's strange figure rolling in the air on the surveillance screen, the Empire officers who were mobilizing heavy firepower infantry to chase after the intruder felt a chill in their hearts for no reason. A loud boom sounded. The black MXD's heavy mechanical leg stomped fiercely on the platform. The partition that was made from the super alloy keel of the Empire's battleship was easily torn into pieces by the tremendous force of the impact. Amidst the flying dust and debris, the MXD was like a fallen devil. It fell even lower, as if it was about to enter the lowest level of hell. On the floor where the Empire's battleship command room was located, a thick and solid steel beam was forcefully broken from the middle. It charged towards both sides at an extremely fast speed, piercing into the thick imitation battleship partition wall and letting out two chilling popping sounds. The mechanical leg that was full of diamond-shaped anti-skid patterns, as soon as it broke this steel beam and stepped firmly on the ground, it trembled fiercely again and forcefully bounced up again. It rushed straight ahead, turning into a gray shadow. The entire movement was done in one breath, calmly in the rapid and high-speed environment. This scene was like a graceful young girl wearing a white veil lightly tapping on the lotus in the pond with her bare right foot. She floated forward, the dewdrops on the petals gradually falling, but they didn't drip into the green water. However, this was an extremely heavy military mech, yet it was able to make such swift and gentle evasive movements. The Imperial officers who were staring at the surveillance screen could not believe their eyes. They roared in panic and fear, ordering the troops in the warship to catch up as soon as possible. The twin engines of the black MXD mecha were operating at full power, the low rumble of its engines turning somewhat sharp and piercing at this moment. The unique pale blue particle light of the turbulence device at the back of the mecha gushed out, propelling the heavy body of the mecha forward with a roar. With one leap, the mecha forcefully broke through two Imperial lines of defense and entered a tunnel at high speed. The height of this passageway was only 5 meters, and the high-speed black mecha was almost 7 meters tall. Although the mecha maintained its forward diving posture, the highest point of the mecha still slammed hard into the ceiling of the passageway. Like a rough steel axe cutting through a smooth piece of paper, the ceiling above the tunnel was torn open with a crashing sound, leaving behind a ghastly hole. The mecha's SCC system and some of its miniature surveillance equipment were damaged to a certain extent in this fierce and somewhat reckless high-speed charge. However, Sulu, who was in the cockpit, did not care about this at all. In the dim lighting, one could see the young body under the ultra-thin simulation system trembling slightly. His exposed thin lips were slightly pale, but he did not move at all. He stared at the image that appeared on the screen and the continuously scrolling light dots indicating the structure diagram. His eyes were narrowed very much, but his pupils were very bright. "That's a dead end. Block him there." The Imperial officer in the command room of the warship did not understand why that fierce Federation mecha would charge into that dead-end tunnel like a rat in a panic. He shouted loudly in ecstasy. Sulu narrowed his eyes as he stared at the wall on the screen that was getting closer and closer. The burning lines in his body flowed quickly, and every pair of muscle fibers began to tremble. It was not that he had used all his strength, but that he felt some kind of excitement. Was a dead end really a dead end? He had never believed in this. It was just like that famous road on the outskirts of the capital city. If there really was no road, then he would open one himself. Walking his own road did not mean that the enemy had no road to walk, but he would always be able to find his own way out of a dead end. The black MXD did not slow down. Instead, it sped up and charged towards the heavy isolation wall at the end of the tunnel. The Darlin machine cannon at the front of the left mechanical arm blasted out beautiful gunfire, blasting countless holes and terrifying splinters into the wall. Meanwhile, its right mechanical arm ejected a sharp special alloy blade. In the instant that the mecha crashed heavily into the thick wall, countless sharp flashes of the blade abruptly burst forth. A wave of ear-numbing and brain-numbing screeches rang out, the sound of metal scraping against hard objects. A strange cloud of dust had yet to disperse at the end of the tunnel, but the black mecha was already incomparably valiant, charging over without reason. Behind the thick wall was an alloy door. The black mecha broke through it. Behind the door, there was another thick isolation wall. The black mecha broke through it. Inside the complex structure of the Empire's battleship, the black mecha, which looked a bit small in comparison, was no longer as unpredictable as a ghost. Instead, it turned into a mountain-splitting axe, unreasonably attacking in a straight line. For a moment, no one knew what this mecha was trying to do. Apart from Sulu and the old guy in the tri-winged warship 7,000 kilometers above the Imperium's fleet like a ghost, nobody could figure out their plan. Relying on the sensitive equipment on the MXD, the central computer of the Federation had been deducing and confirming the relevant structural plans of the Imperium's warship and calculating the possible deployment of the enemy's forces. More than 10 seconds ago, it finally found a path. This path was a straight path. A dead end that led straight to the core area of the Empire's battleship. A path that led to the death of Duke Carleton. The powerful black MXD, under Su Li's almost crazy control, continued to break through like this. After breaking through 3 walls and 4 doors, it finally arrived at the destination of his journey, or rather, the location of the mission. The strange sound of air currents exploding suddenly rang out. The wall was like a brittle, air-dried synthetic skin, shattering piece by piece and then collapsing to the ground. The black MXD mecha entered at high speed from the outside of the hole and landed heavily on the ground. Right now, the black mecha's exterior was already covered in wounds. It was a horrible sight, full of dust and rocks, but it still looked like an inviolable god. The command center of the battleship had been filled with shouts of panic, anger, and orders. Following the unbelievable appearance of this black mecha, all of them suddenly stopped. Hundreds of Imperial officers stared at this Federation mecha in disbelief, shocked, speechless. Right now, the tri-wing battleship that was 7,000 kilometers above the Empire's battleship slowly adjusted its position. The Federal Central Computer that was automatically controlling the tri-wing battleship started to prepare for the high-speed dive that was about to start. For some reason, the existence of this logic program felt a very strange data flow phenomenon. Maybe it was emotions. The Federal Central Computer thought that what it was about to do was similar to Su Li's crazy mecha running, so it was a bit excited. Duke Carleton, who had been staring at the screen with a pale face, suddenly turned around and stared at the Federation mecha in shock. The surveillance system of the battleship couldn't keep up with the speed of this Federation mecha at all. Who was the person inside this mecha? Most importantly of all, how could he find the channel that led to the command center so easily and freely inside his own warship when he himself had not figured it out yet? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.